In the rolling hills of Scotland stands a chapel that defies time and explanation. Built in the 15th century, Rosslyn Chapel is covered from floor to ceiling with carvings that whisper of forgotten worlds, plans that should not have been known in medieval Europe, symbols tied to secret brotherhoods, and patterns that hint at music hidden in stone. Was Rosslyn merely a place of worship, or was it a code book carved in rock, a vault of Templar secrets, waiting to be unlocked? Tonight, we step into the shadows of Rosslyn Chapel and uncover the mystery etched into its very walls. At first glance, it appears to be a place of worship, but as the eye lingers on its walls, its pillars, and its ceiling, something stirs within the imagination. For every inch of Rosslyn is alive with carvings, angels, demons, biblical scenes, but also strange figures that seem to whisper of another world entirely. Plans that should not exist in Europe during the Middle Ages. Intricate knots and symbols tied to the ancient Celts, the Freemasons, and perhaps even the Knights Templar themselves. Some see only decoration. Others see a secret code carved in stone. It is said that Rosslyn Chapel holds within its walls the blueprint of a mystery that stretches across centuries, linking lost gospels, forbidden relics, and the greatest treasure of the Templars. Was Rosslyn built as a simple act of devotion, or was it designed as a secret vault, encoding a hidden truth too dangerous for the world to know? As the sun sets, Rosslyn transforms. Shadows stretch across its medieval stonework, and the carvings seem to come alive. Some visitors swear the chapel has a presence, as though it watches those who enter. Others speak of an energy that pulses within its walls, a resonance, like music carved in silence, waiting to be heard. For 500 years, this chapel has guarded its secrets. Tonight, we walk through its doors. Tonight, we listen to the story carved into its stone, and perhaps, by candlelight and whispers of history, we may glimpse the hidden world that Rosslyn has been hiding in plain sight. This is the mystery of Rosslyn Chapel. Our journey begins in the year 1446, in a quiet valley south of Edinburgh. William Sinclair, the first Earl of Caithness, ordered the foundations of a chapel to be laid to the outside world. This was a noble act of faith, a place for prayer, for devotion, for honoring Christ and the Virgin Mary. Yet, almost from the very beginning, whispers suggested that Rosslyn was more than just another medieval church. William Sinclair himself was no ordinary nobleman. The Sinclair family had deep ties to Scotland, Norse ancestry, and according to legend, connections to the mysterious Knights Templar, who had vanished from history a century before. The Sinclairs were not only warriors and nobles, they were keepers of secrets. Some say William inherited ancient knowledge, a blueprint of sacred geometry, esoteric wisdom, and perhaps even fragments of a hidden Templar tradition. Rosslyn Chapel rose slowly, stone by stone, under the work of master masons. But unlike the towering Gothic cathedrals of France or England, Rosslyn was built on a smaller, almost intimate scale. Yet its details were unlike anything else in Europe. No blank walls, no plain pillars. Instead, a living tapestry of carvings that seemed to overflow with meaning. Step inside, and one is surrounded by a forest of symbols. Every surface carries an image, angels playing musical instruments, the 7 virtues and the 7 deadly sins, serpents twisting into knots, pagan-like green men with vines sprouting from their mouths, symbols of life, death, and rebirth. It is as though the chapel was not merely constructed, but encoded. Some historians claim Rosslyn's carvings were simply expressions of devotion, a mason's creativity, but others suggest they form a hidden language, a code left behind by initiates of an ancient brotherhood. Perhaps the most curious detail is this: many of the carvings appear to depict plants that should not have been known in Scotland in the 1400s. leaves of aloe vera, cobs of maize, corn, a crop native to the Americas which Columbus would not officially bring back to Europe until decades later. How could such carvings exist? Were they the imagination of a stonemason who had never seen these plants? Or does it hint at something far more profound, that knowledge of the New World existed long before Columbus, and that Rosslyn Chapel quietly recorded it in stone? And then there are the legends. Local lore whispers that deep beneath Rosslyn lies a crypt, a sealed chamber said to contain relics brought back from Jerusalem. Some claim it is the final resting place of the Holy Grail. Others speak of ancient scrolls, perhaps even the lost Gospels themselves. For centuries, the crypt has remained sealed, untouchable, its mysteries locked away from both church and state. It is in this tension between the visible carvings above and the unseen treasures below that Rosslyn's allure grows stronger. The masons who carved its walls left behind more than ornament. Some believe they encoded sacred geometry into the very layout of the chapel, proportions that mirror Solomon's temple in Jerusalem, alignments that echo the movements of stars and planets, even the music of the universe itself. For recent researchers have proposed that Rosslyn's carvings correspond to musical notes, a hidden hymn locked within stone. Rosslyn, then, is not just a building, it is a manuscript carved in rock, a text without words, waiting to be read. For centuries, kings, scholars, and seekers have tried to decipher it. Some come away convinced it hides the greatest secret of Christendom. Others dismiss it as myth. Yet, the mystery persists. As night falls over Midlothian, one can imagine the flicker of torches against those ancient walls. Shadows dance across the carvings, and the figures seem to move, angels, demons, saints, and secrets, alive in the shifting light. It is here, in the quiet stillness of Rosslyn, that we begin to feel the weight of history pressing in. A chapel that should have been simple instead became a labyrinth of symbols. A nobleman who should have built for prayer may have built to preserve a hidden truth, and carvings that should reflect the old world seem to whisper of the new. This is the birth of the Rosslyn mystery. The story of Rosslyn Chapel begins in a quiet Scottish valley, where the rolling hills of Midlothian hold within them more history and mystery than their pastoral beauty suggests. Rising from this landscape is a small stone building that, at first glance, seems like any other medieval church. Yet as one draws closer, the details begin to reveal themselves, and it becomes clear that Rosslyn is unlike any other place of worship in the Christian world. Its walls and pillars overflow with carvings that defy easy explanation, and its reputation as a place of secrets, legends, and whispers of hidden knowledge has persisted for centuries. The chapel was founded in 1446 by Sir William Sinclair, a nobleman of the Sinclair family, one of Scotland's most powerful and enigmatic dynasties. On the surface, his intention was to create a private place of worship, a collegiate chapel served by priests who would pray for his soul and those of his descendants. Yet from the moment construction began, Rosslyn was destined to be something far greater than an ordinary family chapel. The craftsmanship invested in its design, the sheer density of its symbolism, and the mysteries encoded into its very stones all suggest that Rosslyn was conceived as a monument to ideas that reached far beyond Orthodox Christianity. Walking into Rosslyn Chapel, many visitors speak of a palpable sense of awe, as though the building itself is alive with secrets. The stone is covered from floor to ceiling with thousands of carvings, so many, in fact, that it seems not a single surface has been left untouched. Angels, devils, saints, and demons jostle for space alongside vines, flowers, stars, and strange geometric patterns. The walls feel less like the surface of a church and more like the pages of a book. each symbol a letter in a language not easily read. Among these countless carvings, a few stand out as especially puzzling. The most famous are those that some believe depict maize or corn to modern eyes. The resemblance is striking, rounded kernels clustered together in a form unmistakably like an ear of corn. But maize was a crop indigenous to the Americas and unknown in Europe until decades after Christopher Columbus crossed the Atlantic in 1492. Yet Rosslyn's carvings predate Columbus by nearly half a century. If the designs truly are maize, then someone in Scotland had knowledge of the New World long before it entered official European history. Next to the maize are carvings that appear to represent aloe vera, another plant native to distant lands. The aloe plant was prized for its healing properties, but it should not have been known in Scotland in the mid-15th century. Together, the maize and aloe have fueled theories that Rosslyn encodes evidence of pre-Columbian transatlantic contact, possibly by the Knights Templar or their descendants. If true, the chapel is not just a repository of faith, but a stone record of voyages and discoveries deliberately hidden from the historical record. The Sinclair family's connection to the Knights Templar adds weight to this theory. The Templars, once one of the most powerful military and religious orders in Europe, had been disbanded by Pope Clement V and King Philip IV of France in 1312. Yet many of them are believed to have escaped persecution, carrying with them immense wealth, knowledge, and perhaps even sacred relics. Scotland, then in conflict with England and defiant of papal control, offered refuge. The Sinclairs, known allies of the Templars, may have preserved the order's secrets for generations, eventually embedding them into Rosslyn Chapel. The most iconic symbol of Rosslyn is the apprentice pillar, an intricately carved column that rises near the altar. Legend tells of a master mason who left for a pilgrimage to study a great column in a distant land. In his absence, his apprentice, guided by a dream, carved the pillar with such skill that it surpassed even the master's vision. When the master returned and saw it, he was overcome with jealousy and killed the apprentice in a fit of rage. His punishment was swift, but the story endures, whether the tale is literal or allegorical. The apprentice pillar is a marvel of craftsmanship. Its spiraling vines twist upward in a pattern that some interpret as DNA helices. Centuries before such structures were known, dragons coil at its base, their mouths feeding the vine's growth, suggesting an interplay of destruction and creation, chaos and order. For others, the pillar is a representation of the tree of life, linking heaven and earth. Some even argue it is a coded symbol of secret knowledge, a geometric key that points to the hidden treasures of the Templars. The apprentice pillar is not the only enigmatic element in the chapel. Across the walls and ceilings, carved faces known as green men stare out from tangles of leaves. These figures are not traditionally Christian, but belong to older pagan traditions, symbolizing fertility, renewal, and the cycles of nature. Why would a Christian chapel be filled with them? The answer may lie in the Templar tradition of syncretism, of gathering wisdom from every culture they encountered. Having traveled through the Middle East during the Crusades, they would have encountered Islamic art, Jewish mysticism, and even remnants of older pagan philosophies. Rosslyn, then, may represent a deliberate fusion of knowledge from many traditions, carved into stone so it would endure. Above, the ceiling adds another layer of mystery. The barrel vault is decorated with hundreds of stars, arranged in patterns that some scholars argue may represent constellations. Others suggest the ceiling encodes musical notation, a cosmic hymn frozen in stone. In 2007, researchers claimed to decode part of this frozen music, reconstructing melodies supposedly hidden in the chapel's design. If true, Rosslyn is not only a building, but an instrument, a sacred space where sound and architecture intertwine. The density of symbolism within Rosslyn has given rise to countless theories. Some believe the chapel was built as a secret repository for the Holy Grail, or the Ark of the Covenant, hidden away by the Templars. Others see it as a map in stone, pointing to locations across Europe and even the New World where treasures or sacred relics might lie. Still others interpret the carvings as a record of esoteric truths, a library of stone designed to preserve knowledge through the centuries, accessible only to those who know how to read it. What seems clear is that Rosslyn is not a conventional Christian chapel. Its very excess of decoration sets it apart. In most medieval churches, carvings were limited to biblical scenes and symbolic ornamentation. Rosslyn, by contrast, feels like a deliberate encyclopedia of knowledge, encompassing myth, science, nature, and faith. Its builders seemed determined to create a space that transcended orthodox religion, a place where all traditions and truths could converge. For visitors today, Rosslyn Chapel is both inspiring and unsettling. Standing among its carvings, one cannot escape the sense that it is speaking in a language just beyond our grasp. Every figure, every vine, every symbol seems to carry layers of meaning waiting to be uncovered. The maize and aloe carvings whisper of forgotten voyages. The green men suggest an unbroken link to ancient fertility cults. The apprentice pillar tells of jealousy, genius, and sacred geometry. The ceiling of stars hums with hidden music. Together, they create a place that is less a chapel and more a riddle, a puzzle cast in stone. The enduring allure of Rosslyn lies in this tension between what we know and what we sense. Historians argue over whether the carvings truly depict maize or aloe, whether the ceiling encodes music or not, whether the Sinclair family had ties to the Templars or merely carried their legend. Yet for those who stand in the chapel, such debates seem secondary. What matters is the unmistakable feeling that the building holds secrets, that it was built with the intention of hiding knowledge in plain sight. Rosslyn Chapel may never yield all of its mysteries. Perhaps that is its purpose. It does not offer final answers, but invites us into the act of questioning. It asks us to consider the possibility that history is not as neat and linear as we are taught. It suggests that voyages may have been made, knowledge may have been exchanged, and truths may have been hidden long before official records tell us so. In this way, Rosslyn Chapel stands as a monument not only to faith but to curiosity. It is a place where the sacred and the secret intertwine, where stone becomes scripture, and where the past speaks in whispers that still reach across the centuries. Whether or not the Templars left their treasure here, whether or not maize and aloe truly appear in its carvings, Rosslyn's greatest gift may be its power to awaken in us the desire to look deeper, to question, and to imagine. Rosslyn Chapel is not a building that merely sits in the quiet countryside of Midlothian. It is a living enigma carved in stone. To walk through its doors is to step into a place where the boundary between the physical and the mystical blurs, where history, legend, and speculation are woven together into a tapestry so intricate that even after centuries of study, its meaning remains elusive. The chapel is small compared to the grand cathedrals of Europe, yet it radiates an aura far larger than its physical form. It seems to whisper secrets the moment you cross its threshold, secrets that feel both ancient and timeless, as though the stone itself remembers stories too dangerous or too profound to be spoken aloud. The first impression one has inside is not just of beauty, though beauty is everywhere. It is of density, of overwhelming detail, as though every inch of surface demanded to speak and no silence could be allowed. There are angels with musical instruments, demons writhing in torment, plants curling up pillars, faces peering from shadows, and symbols that resist easy explanation. where many chapels employ art as a didactic tool to instruct the faithful, Rosslyn feels different. It feels like a coded manuscript written in a language of stone. A manuscript that one must study not with the eyes alone, but with imagination, intuition, and perhaps initiation into secrets lost to time. William Sinclair, the nobleman who commissioned Rosslyn in the 15th century, could hardly have foreseen that his private family chapel would one day become the epicenter of so many theories. Or perhaps he did foresee it, and that was precisely the point. For Sinclair's bloodline, intertwined with both Scottish nobility and Norman ancestry, carried with it whispers of deeper connections. The Sinclairs have long been linked to the Knights Templar, those warrior monks who were both feared and revered in the Middle Ages, accused of heresy and dissolved by the Church in 1307. If even fragments of those accusations were true, if even a handful of Templar knights escaped with their knowledge and their treasures, then Scotland, with its rebellious independence and sympathetic lords, would have been a natural refuge. Some argue that Rosslyn is the material proof of that refuge, a chapel built not only for worship, but as a coded sanctuary for the memory of a fallen order. The carvings are where these whispers take on their most tangible form. Among the thousands of motifs etched into Rosslyn's walls are images that defy explanation. Within the bounds of medieval Europe, the most startling, perhaps, are the depictions that many believe represent maize corn, a plant native to the Americas before Columbus sailed. Before the Old World was officially introduced to the New, maize appears here, carved into a 15th century Scottish chapel. The kernels are distinct, the plant's form unmistakable, its representation far too precise to be dismissed as generic vegetation, alongside maize. Others point to carvings resembling aloe vera, another species with New World associations. If these identifications are correct, then Rosslyn contains evidence of transatlantic knowledge decades before Columbus's voyage. Of course, skeptics push back. They argue that such interpretations are fanciful, that the carvings could just as easily represent stylized European plants, that we see what we want to see. But the counterpoint is equally compelling. Why would such unusual forms be carved so carefully, so prominently, if not drawn from something the Masons had actually encountered? The maize, especially, resists casual dismissal. To find it here is to encounter an impossibility, unless contact with the Americas had already occurred. If so, who brought that knowledge back? Some suggest the Norse, who had long ago reached Vinland. Others point directly to the Sinclairs and their supposed ties to voyagers who crossed the Atlantic. In the lore that surrounds Rosslyn, a tantalizing theory emerges that the Templars themselves, or their successors through the Sinclair family, ventured across the ocean in secret, carrying with them both material wealth and esoteric wisdom. The carvings, then, are not mere decoration, but breadcrumbs left to signal this hidden history. And the carvings are not only botanical. Everywhere in Rosslyn, symbolism abounds. Dragons coil around columns, angels perch with harps, pagan green men peer out from the stone, their faces surrounded by curling leaves. The green man, in particular, appears dozens of times, far more frequently than in most churches of the era. He is a symbol of renewal, fertility, and nature's eternal cycle. A figure as pagan as he is Christian, one foot in folklore and one in mysticism. Why would he appear so often in a Christian chapel unless the builders wished to convey something more layered, something that transcended strict orthodoxy? Rosslyn, it seems, is a bridge between traditions, a place where Christian, pagan, and esoteric elements merge in one grand vision. The apprentice pillar is the masterpiece among masterpieces, twisting upward in a spiral of astonishing complexity. Entwined with vines and guarded by dragons, it stands like a tree of life carved into stone. Legend has it that a master mason, having traveled abroad to study a great design, returned to find his apprentice had carved the pillar in his absence, drawing from a vision he claimed came to him in a dream. In jealous rage, the master killed his apprentice, only to be executed for the crime. This tragic tale, still told by guides today, masks another possibility that the pillar is itself a message. Some scholars have suggested that its spirals reflect mathematical patterns far ahead of their time, even foreshadowing the double helix of DNA. Others see in it the great traditions of sacred geometry, spirals that mirror the growth of plants, shells, and galaxies, encoding the fundamental patterns of creation. If that is true, then the apprentice pillar is less a piece of art and more a compendium of universal knowledge, preserved in stone for those with the wisdom to see it. Rosslyn's mysteries extend beneath the floor as well. For centuries, there have been persistent rumors of hidden vaults below the chapel, sealed chambers never opened in modern times. Some claim that these vaults contain the treasures of the Templars, spirited away from France during their persecution and brought to Scotland for safekeeping. Among these treasures, the most dramatic claim is the Holy Grail itself, hidden beneath Rosslyn's stones. But the Grail, as legend teaches, is never one thing. For some, it is a cup, the chalice used by Christ at the Last Supper. For others, it is a lineage, a bloodline preserved across the centuries. For still others, it is knowledge a body of, teachings too dangerous for the world to know. Rosslyn's hidden vaults could, in theory, hold any of these, or none. Yet the rumor persists, growing stronger each century, sustained by the aura of secrecy that clings to the chapel like ivy on its walls. Explorers, archaeologists, and seekers have all attempted to penetrate these secrets. Some surveys conducted with radar equipment have detected anomalies beneath the floor, suggesting the presence of large voids or chambers. Yet permission to excavate has rarely been granted, leaving the truth sealed. The treasure, if it exists, remains untouched, as though Rosslyn itself resists giving up its secrets. Beyond its physical structure, Rosslyn radiates influence into culture and imagination. Sir Walter Scott immortalized the chapel in poetry, describing its haunting atmosphere and intricate design. Later, esoteric thinkers claimed it as a proof of their symbolic traditions, seeing in its carvings confirmation of ancient knowledge passed down through secret societies. In the modern era, books and films propelled Rosslyn into global fame, turning it into a pilgrimage site for tourists, seekers, and conspiracy theorists alike. Yet even amidst this popularity, the deeper mystery remains. For while some come seeking adventure or spectacle, others come with the quiet conviction that Rosslyn hides truths still waiting to be uncovered. The alignment of the chapel itself adds another layer of intrigue. Some researchers have noted that Rosslyn's orientation is unusual, deviating from the typical east-west axis of medieval churches. Others point to the geometry of its design, suggesting that the layout encodes mathematical principles tied to sacred geometry, the same principles used in the construction of great cathedrals, pyramids, and temples across the world. Rosslyn, in this interpretation, is not merely a building, but a cipher structure designed to embody truths that transcend any single faith or tradition. And what of the Sinclair family themselves? Their role cannot be overstated. For centuries they have been at the heart of Scottish legend, their lineage entwined with tales of exploration, guardianship, and hidden knowledge. Some accounts suggest that Henry Sinclair, a forebear of William, sailed to North America in the late 14th century, nearly a century before Columbus. If true, the carvings of maize and aloe suddenly make sense. They would not be anomalies or accidents but deliberate references, proof in stone of journeys undertaken and knowledge gained. The Sinclairs, then, would not only be noble patrons, but custodians of an unbroken thread of esoteric history. The chapel itself feels alive with this legacy. To stand within Rosslyn is to feel a kind of timeless presence, as though the centuries collapse and the air vibrates with memory. Some visitors describe an almost palpable energy, a sensation that the building resonates like an instrument, its stones humming with intent. Whether one believes in such impressions or not, the effect is undeniable. Rosslyn feels different. It feels charged. It feels like a place that is waiting for someone, someday, to unlock its final secret. And so we return to the carvings, for they are the heart of the enigma. Thousands of images, each demanding interpretation. Are they mere decoration, the fanciful work of medieval artisans, or are they part of a grand design, a language meant to be read by those with eyes to see? Perhaps they are both. Simultaneously art and code, beauty and message. The truth may lie not in one carving, but in their totality, in the pattern that emerges when all are considered together. Rosslyn, then, is less a puzzle of individual pieces than a mosaic, its meaning revealed only when one steps back to see the whole. The fascination with Rosslyn endures because it resists resolution. It gives enough to spark wonder, but never enough to close the case. Every answer leads to another question. Every interpretation opens another door. Is it a Christian chapel or a Templar shrine? A family monument or a coded library of esoteric wisdom? A repository of relics or simply the work of artisans pushing their craft to its limits? It may be all of these at once or none. The ambiguity is the point, for ambiguity invites curiosity, and curiosity ensures survival. Rosslyn lives because its story is unfinished, because its secrets are still intact. As we leave the dim interior and step into the Scottish air, the chapel remains behind us, but its impression lingers. It is a reminder that history is not always what it seems, that the stones of the past may hold knowledge lost to the written record. Rosslyn Chapel is not just a monument of the 15th century. It is a voice from the shadows of history, still speaking, still whispering, still daring us to listen. And perhaps, if we listen closely enough, if we trace the spirals of the apprentice pillar, if we study the maze carved impossibly into stone, if we honor the legends that cling to its vaults, we may begin to glimpse the truth. Not the tidy truth of textbooks, but a deeper truth that human history is more complex, more connected, and more mysterious than we have been led to believe. Rosslyn is not just a chapel. It is a challenge. It dares us to ask, what if the boundaries of history are far wider than we imagine? For as long as it stands, Rosslyn will keep asking that question, and as long as we return to it again and again, with fresh eyes and restless minds, the chapel will continue to fulfill its purpose, not to give us all the answers, but to keep us searching. The light of history is never evenly spread. Some corners glow brightly under the weight of written chronicles, monuments, and artifacts, while others linger in twilight, where memory and legend intermingle. As we move deeper into our exploration, we arrive at one of these half-lit corners, the Newport Tower in Rhode Island. At first glance, it appears as a crumbling stone ruin, a circular structure supported by sturdy arches, standing quietly in Turo Park. To many, it is simply a colonial relic, perhaps a windmill left behind by Governor Benedict Arnold in the 17th century. Yet, for others, it is a beacon, an enduring clue that whispers of voyages made long before Columbus ever set his sails toward the west. The tower's mystery begins with its very shape. Unlike the rectangular and timber-based structures of early colonial America, the Newport Tower is a rotunda of stone, resembling medieval architecture more than anything associated with early settlers. Its arches curve gracefully, and its design seems almost foreign, echoing patterns seen in old European churches or fortified outposts. To those who know the Templars' reputation for blending engineering prowess with sacred geometry, the tower becomes more than a ruin, it becomes a riddle encoded in mortar and stone. Local tradition for generations referred to the structure as the Old Stone Mill. But the deeper question always lingered: was it truly a 17th century windmill? Windmills of that era had very different construction styles, and few, if any, resembled the round, arched base of the Newport Tower. Some historians argue that Arnold, whose will even mentions my stone-built windmill, simply adapted an older structure. Others, however, sense that Arnold did not build it at all, but merely claimed ownership of something ancient that had stood there long before English colonists laid claim to the land. It is here that the Templars step into the shadows of speculation. Scholars and enthusiasts of hidden history note that the tower's proportions seem to follow sacred geometric ratios often found in Templar and medieval constructions across Europe. For instance, the arches align with celestial points, and when measured, some suggest the dimensions reflect astronomical knowledge far beyond mere utility. Could it be that the Newport Tower was not a mill, but a monument, not a tool of industry, but a marker of presence, meant to signal to those who knew how to read the language of stone? One theory, advanced most famously by authors like Andrew Sinclair, suggests that the Newport Tower was built by Norse explorers, perhaps in partnership with the Templars, who inherited secret maps and navigational knowledge. The Sinclairs of Scotland, connected both to the Norse and to the Knights Templar, were said to have led expeditions across the Atlantic in the late 14th century, leaving behind markers of their passage. If this theory holds, the Newport Tower could stand as physical testimony to a medieval voyage into the New World, an expedition carefully hidden from the official histories of Europe, yet immortalized in stone. Skeptics, of course, offer more grounded explanations. They argue that the tower's design, while unusual, is not impossible within the colonial context. They point to Governor Arnold's will as direct evidence, and to parallels with windmill structures in Europe. Yet, the lingering question remains: why does the Newport Tower look so different from any known New England windmill? Why does it evoke, instead, a kind of medieval, almost sacred architecture? Why does it seem to echo the same architectural sensibilities found in the ruins of Templar chapels? When researchers examined the mortar of the tower in the 20th century, they noted that it contained a mixture consistent with 17th century colonial building practices. Too many, this was the final word. Yet others counter that if the Templars or their successors had built the tower centuries earlier, it might have been repointed or repaired later by colonists, explaining the presence of later materials. This possibility keeps the debate alive, suspended between competing interpretations. The tower's alignment only adds fuel to the mystery. Some claim that its windows and arches are not random, but deliberately positioned. One arch appears to frame the setting sun at certain times of the year. Others suggest that the openings align with key celestial events, such as solstices or lunar cycles. If so, the Newport Tower may not have been designed for milling grain at all, but for observing the heavens, a practice deeply tied to both Templar traditions and to earlier Norse explorers who navigated by the stars. For centuries, local Native American tribes also carried stories of strange visitors who came from across the sea. Long before Columbus, some of these stories speak of bearded men who arrived in ships, carrying objects of strange design. Could the Newport Tower be a remnant connected to such visits? If so, then it not only represents a link to medieval Europe, but also to encounters and exchanges with the indigenous peoples of North America. Long before European colonization altered the land forever, The power of the Newport Tower lies not only in what it may be, but in what it symbolizes. It stands as a physical embodiment of possibility. Even in its silence, it demands that we ask difficult questions. Who built it? Why does it look the way it does? Could it be that our accepted history is not complete, and that the Templars, or those connected to them, left behind subtle but enduring traces of their journeys into the New World? From the Newport Tower, we can broaden our gaze to the wider pattern. It is not alone in its mystery. Across North America, enigmatic stone structures, carvings, and markers seem to whisper of a past older than our official textbooks admit. When seen in isolation, each clue may appear inconclusive, but when woven together, the runestones, the star alignments, the sacred geometry, they create a web of suggestion, too compelling to dismiss entirely. What makes the Newport Tower especially evocative is the way it bridges two worlds: the official, colonial narrative and the forbidden, speculative narrative of pre-Columbian contact. It exists within the realm of history, documented and recorded, yet it also stretches beyond history, into legend and mystery. It embodies the tension at the heart of our exploration, the space between what we know and what we suspect, between what was written and what was hidden. Even today, the tower draws curious visitors from around the world. Some come as tourists, seeing only an odd colonial ruin. Others arrive as seekers, standing quietly beneath its arches, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down. For those attuned to its mystery, the Newport Tower becomes not just a relic, but a doorway, a reminder that history is never as settled as we are told. Its arches open not merely into the park around it, but into the possibility of lost voyages, hidden maps, and secret histories waiting to be uncovered. In this way, the Newport Tower stands as a silent witness to the idea that the Templars may have reached America. Whether it was truly built by their hands or simply reminds us of their architectural spirit, the effect is the same. It ignites the imagination, pulling us deeper into the labyrinth of clues scattered across the New World. From stone to legend, from carving to cross, the story unfolds not as a single line, but as a tapestry, each thread connecting across time and place. And as we step back from the Newport Tower, the image lingers, a circle of stone, arches rooted deep into the earth, windows gazing silently at the sky. It may be colonial, it may be medieval, it may be both, but more than anything, it is mysterious. And that mystery keeps alive the tantalizing question: what if the Templars have already walked these shores? Long before the sails of Columbus appeared on the horizon, the Newport Tower, whether proof or puzzle, is part of that greater mystery. To understand its place fully, we must move beyond Rhode Island and trace the threads outward, to other markers across the continent. Only then can we begin to glimpse the larger story. A story of maps, voyages, and sacred knowledge carried across oceans. A story that refuses to remain buried, no matter how many centuries pass. If you walk through the quiet town of Westford, Massachusetts, far from the bustle of Boston or the roar of the Atlantic coast, you may find yourself drawn to a simple stone ledge, nestled in the earth. At first glance, it is unremarkable, an old weathered rock half hidden in the grass, its surface worn smooth by centuries of rain, frost, and sun. But look closer, and faint lines begin to emerge, grooves carved into the surface, shallow yet deliberate, form the outline of something more than mere geology. To some, these lines sketch the figure of a medieval knight, recumbent as though laid in eternal rest, his sword by his side. To others, it is simply an accident of erosion, a natural quirk mistaken for meaning. This stone is known as the Westford Knight, and for more than a century, it has stood at the center of one of the most tantalizing mysteries in American history. The Westford Knight is not just a curiosity of New England folklore, it is a doorway into questions that touch on the very foundations of Western history. Did Europeans reach America before Columbus? Did the Templars or their descendants through the Scottish Sinclair family leave behind this carved memorial in the wilds of Massachusetts? Or is the carving nothing more than a local legend born of wishful imagination? To begin unraveling the enigma, we must return to the late 19th century. Accounts of the carving began to surface in the 1870s when antiquarians and local historians first noted the unusual markings on the bedrock. Observers described what seemed to be the faint outline of a human figure. Over time, interpretations grew more elaborate. A knight in armor, chainmail visible on his body, a broadsword stretching across his form, perhaps even a shield or helm. By the early 20th century, the name Westford Knight had firmly taken hold, and with it, a story began to crystallize. According to legend, this carving is no idle ornament. It is a memorial, carved by companions of a fallen knight who died during a secret voyage to the New World. In the late 14th century, the voyage itself is said to have been led by none other than Prince Henry Sinclair of Orkney, a Scottish nobleman with deep connections to the remnants of the Knights Templar. The carving, then, is thought to commemorate Sir James Gunn, a Scottish knight who accompanied Sinclair on his expedition across the Atlantic. The narrative, as it is often told, goes something like this. In 1398, Henry Sinclair set sail from the Orkney Islands with a fleet of ships, guided by navigational knowledge inherited from both Norse traditions and Templar secrets. After crossing the ocean, Sinclair and his men reached the coast of what is now Nova Scotia, then journeyed southward along the New England coast. At some point during this expedition, Sir James Gunn fell ill or was injured and died. To honor him, his fellow knights carved his likeness into the bedrock at Westford, Massachusetts, ensuring that his memory would endure, even in this strange new land. The story is romantic, evocative, and filled with the atmosphere of lost history. But how credible is it? For skeptics, the Westford Knight is an example of pattern recognition, our tendency to see shapes, images, and symbols where none exist. Just as one person may see faces in the clouds or animals in the stars, so too might the grooves of a weathered rock be mistaken for a medieval knight. Geologists point out that natural erosion, glacial scratching, and centuries of exposure can produce marks that the human mind interprets as intentional. From this perspective, the Westford Knight is no knight at all, but merely the imagination of antiquarians projected onto stone. Yet the debate is not so easily settled. Advocates for the authenticity of the carving argue that the grooves are too deliberate, too specific, to be the result of chance. They highlight the shape of the sword measured by some researchers to resemble a 14th century Scottish claymore and the proportions of the body. Some even claim to see the details of chainmail or heraldic insignia, features unlikely to appear in random rock weathering. For these believers, the carving is evidence of a story long suppressed or forgotten, the arrival of European knights. In America long before Columbus, the Westford Knight does not exist in isolation. It forms part of a larger constellation of evidence and legend pointing toward pre-Columbian European contact. The Newport Tower in Rhode Island, with its stone, arches, and circular design, has been interpreted by some as medieval masonry, far older than the colonial period to which mainstream historians assign it. The Kensington Runestone in Minnesota, inscribed with runes and bearing the controversial hooked X symbol, has likewise been linked to Norse explorers or even Templar descendants. Then there is the Zeno narrative, a collection of documents from the Venetian brothers Niccolo and Antonio Zeno, which purports to describe a voyage across the Atlantic under the leadership of a figure many identify as Henry Sinclair, Taken together, these artifacts and legends weave a compelling tapestry. Each thread may be frayed or uncertain, but when woven side by side, they suggest the possibility that our historical timeline is incomplete, that voyages to the Americas occurred not just by the Norse at Vinland, but by others who followed. In their wake, the Sinclair connection is particularly intriguing. Henry Sinclair, Earl of Orkney, was a figure of both nobility and mystery. As the story goes, after the dissolution of the Knights Templar in the early 14th century, many Templars fled persecution and sought refuge in Scotland, a land often at odds with papal authority. There, they are said to have allied with the powerful Sinclair family. Rosslyn Chapel, constructed later by Henry's descendant William Sinclair, is filled with carvings and symbols many interpret as encoded Templar and Masonic messages. If Henry Sinclair did, in fact, inherit Templar knowledge and resources, he may have possessed both the means and the motive to launch a voyage westward. Here, the Westford Knight becomes more than just a carving. It becomes a key linking the Sinclairs, the Templars, Rosslyn Chapel, and the broader mystery of transatlantic contact. Imagine, for a moment, the scene: a small band of knights and sailors, having crossed the vast Atlantic, stand in the forests of New England. One of their number, Sir James Gunn, lies dying. They gather around him, far from home, their armor glinting in the dappled sunlight. With solemnity, they vow to honor him as they would in their homeland. Taking hammer and chisel, they carve his likeness into stone, a knight forever resting in the new world. It is both a memorial and a marker, a sign to future generations that they were here. The emotional power of this vision is undeniable, and perhaps it is this power that sustains the legend, even in the face of skepticism. Because whether or not the carving is truly a knight, the story it tells speaks to something deep within. The yearning for connection, for hidden truths, for the possibility that history is richer and stranger than we have been told. Local tradition has kept the Westford Knight alive. For over a century, tourists and enthusiasts still make pilgrimages to see the carving, tracing the faint outlines with their fingertips, imagining the moment of its creation. For some, it is a sacred site, for others, a curiosity. But in either case, it continues to spark imagination. Skeptics remind us that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. They point out that no definitive archaeological proof has yet linked the carving to the 14th century, nor to Sinclair or Gunn. The Zeno narrative itself is disputed, with many historians dismissing it as a later fabrication. And the idea of a Templar voyage to America rests largely on circumstantial connections, symbolism, and interpretation. But the counterargument is this: absence of proof is not proof of absence. History is not always written in books or preserved in archives. Sometimes it lingers in whispers, in carvings, in anomalies that defy easy categorization. The Westford Knight may not be proof in the academic sense, but it is a clue, a reminder that history is a puzzle still incomplete. What is undeniable is the cultural significance of the Westford Knight. It has become part of the mythic landscape of America, woven into a larger narrative of lost explorers, hidden treasures, and forbidden histories. Alongside Oak Island, Rosslyn Chapel, and the Hooked X, the Westford Knight occupies a place where legend and history blur, where certainty gives way to possibility. And so, when we stand before the Westford Knight, we are invited into a dialogue not only with the past, but with ourselves. Do we accept only what can be proven beyond doubt, or do we allow space for mystery, for stories that challenge the official record? The knight carved in stone may or may not be real, but the yearning it represents, the desire to uncover what has been hidden, to honor those who came before, and to imagine a history broader than we were taught, is very real indeed. In the end, the Westward Night is not just about whether Europeans reached America before Columbus. It is about the fragility of memory, the persistence of legend, and the enduring power of human imagination. It asks us to reconsider what we know, to listen for whispers in the stone, and to acknowledge that history is not a finished book, but a story still unfolding. Whether carved by medieval knights, colonial settlers, or the hand of nature itself, the Westward Night remains etched into rock, etched into legend, and etched into our collective search for truth. The story of the Templars in America, if we allow ourselves to linger within its possibility, is not only one of maps, towers, or stones etched with curious runes. It is also one of silence, concealment, and slow assimilation into lands that were vast, unfamiliar, and alive with mysteries of their own. As we draw further along this winding path, our attention turns to the notion that if the Templars or their successors ever crossed the Atlantic, they would not have been conquerors in the image of later explorers, planting flags and proclaiming dominion, but rather quiet pilgrims, moving in secrecy, blending into the rhythms of new worlds. Imagine, for a moment, a group of weary men who had once worn the Red Cross upon their cloaks, men whose order had been shattered by papal decree and royal edict, and who now carried not banners of war, but fragments of knowledge, relics of power, and memories of rituals older than the cathedrals of Europe. If they reached the shores of Nova Scotia, or crept into the river valleys of New England, what would have greeted them? Dense forests, untouched by European saws, rivers like mirrors reflecting the sky, and peoples who already lived according to their own sacred calendars, their own cosmologies tied to the land and stars. It is here that speculation grows fertile, for some say the Templars, or those shaped by their traditions, carried not just relics, but a system of geometry, a sacred alignment that bound earth to heaven. These theories suggest that when they cleared spaces in the forests, they did not do so at random. They marked them according to Venus alignments, according to star patterns, according to principles of measure that we see echoed in the very proportions of Gothic cathedrals. Such places, small glades, stone circles, or geometric clearings become, in this telling, quiet sanctuaries. They were neither forts nor towns, but nodes of mystery, built not for defense but for continuity of secret knowledge. The scholar William Mann, and others who tread the fringes of mainstream history, suggest that these places acted almost like open-air chapels, where rituals could be carried out away from the eyes of the church that had condemned them. In this vision, the forests of the New World became as holy as the stones of Jerusalem once had been. The land itself became scripture, read by a lining star with clearing, river with compass, stone with shadow. And then there are the whispers of the Venus families, bloodlines, believed to have guarded this knowledge, migrating with it, embedding it in both Europe and North America. These were families who intermarried, who passed on more than names. They carried an awareness of geometry, of symbolism, of the idea that heaven's order could be reflected in Earth's design. Some claim that these families played roles in colonial settlements, centuries later, guiding explorers and masons, alike with quiet hands, always preserving the trace of something older, something deliberately hidden. One cannot help but pause and wonder if such families existed, and if their presence in America was real. Then the landscape itself might be dotted with their fingerprints. Think of the Newport Tower in Rhode Island, a stone structure so out of place, its arches and circular form so unlike the barns and mills of colonial New England, that some insist it must predate Columbus. Its windows, aligned with solstices, its structure echoing both European round churches and astronomical markers, give fuel to those who say it was not a mill at all, but a remnant of a Templar sanctuary. The tower, like so many other enigmatic markers, becomes a cipher, Was it the work of colonial settlers inspired by older traditions? Or was it the direct handiwork of those who crossed the ocean, with secrets to keep beyond Rhode Island? In Westford, Massachusetts, lies the figure of the so-called Westford Knight, a carving on stone that some interpret as the image of a medieval knight, sword by his side. To the skeptical eye, it is little more than scratches shaped by weather and imagination. Yet to believers, it is a memorial, a knight who died far from home, his likeness carved into stone so that his presence would not vanish into the silence of the forest. This, too, fits into the vision of Templar migration, not as armies, but as scattered pilgrims who left behind fragments of their journey in carvings, in towers, in alignments too precise to be accidental. The further we follow these trails, the more they entwine with Oak Island. For there, amidst the mysterious pits, the layers of timber, and the endless pursuit of hidden treasure, lies perhaps the most tantalizing possibility that the Templars themselves buried something of value on that small Nova Scotian island. Not gold alone, though many imagine chests spilling with coins, but knowledge, manuscripts, relics, even the Holy Grail itself in some retellings. The geometric patterns discovered on Oak Island, alignments that point to sacred proportions, seem to echo the very same language of measure and symbol attributed to Templar builders. Could it be that Oak Island was not simply a hiding place, but a ritual site, one tied to the greater network of sacred geometry stretching across both Europe and America? Yet what gives these theories their peculiar power is not simply the possibility of treasure, but the sense of deliberate concealment. The Templars, if present, were not interested in proclamation. They had been betrayed by kings, exiled by popes, and hunted as heretics. In America, they would have had no reason to shout. Their existence, secrecy was survival, assimilation was safety. In the French colonies of Acadia and New France, it is whispered, some descendants of these hidden families quietly entered society, blending into the fabric of early settlements. Their names may have been lost, their rituals diluted, but their presence, according to those who search, still lingers in patterns of architecture, in the compass bearings of towns, in faint alignments traced across maps. This idea that America was not only a refuge, but a canvas for the continuation of a hidden order, touches something deep in us. It suggests that the landscape itself is a kind of palimpsest, a layered text where official history tells one story, but beneath it, written faintly, lies another. It suggests that long before the age of discovery, long before official maps stretched across the Atlantic, there were quiet journeys, small landings, and rituals performed under the canopy of unfamiliar stars. And so, in Chapter 6, as we move further into this tapestry of possibility, we are reminded that history, like the forest, contains clearings, places where the light falls in just such a way as to reveal what was hidden. Some clearings are made by the axe, some by the slow work of time, and some, perhaps, by those who sought to inscribe their knowledge into a land that would one day be called America. Whether or not the Templars truly walked here in secret, whether or not their symbols remain encoded in towers and carvings, the very act of searching ties us to them, for like them, we too are pilgrims, wandering through shadows in search of meaning, piecing together fragments of a story that may yet change the way we see the past. And as the night draws on, as the lantern of imagination burns low, we rest with this thought: the Templars' greatest legacy may not be treasure at all, but the enduring sense that something remains just beyond our grasp, hidden in plain sight, waiting for those with eyes to see. If there is one place where stone, story, and symbol converge into a single, enduring mystery, it is Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland. Rising from the rolling landscape of Midlothian, the chapel has long been regarded not simply as a place of worship, but as a vault of secrets, Its every surface seems to whisper of hidden meanings, of knowledge encoded in stone, of legends that stretch across continents and centuries. For those who trace the possibility of Templar voyages to America, Rosslyn becomes a crucial waypoint, a bridge between the old world and the new, between sacred architecture and forbidden history. The chapel was commissioned in the mid-15th century by William Sinclair, a man whose family lineage had long been entwined with the Templars, Freemasons, and the guardianship of ancient traditions. To step into Rosslyn is to step into a living manuscript carved in stone, where pillars rise like trees in a symbolic forest, where angels play musical instruments never before seen in Scotland, and where vegetal motifs curl across arches in a riot of detail. The space feels alive too, intricate, too ornate, too deliberate to be merely decorative. It is here, among the stone carvings, that the most provocative claim arises: depictions of maize, or corn and aloe vera plants indigenous to the Americas, carved decades before Columbus made his first voyage. The sight of maize in a 15th century Scottish chapel unsettles orthodox timelines. If the carvings are truly what they seem, then someone in Sinclair's circle possessed knowledge of plants found only across the Atlantic. Skeptics argue that the carvings are misinterpreted, that they depict similar European flora, but the resemblance to New World species is striking enough to spark centuries of speculation. What if the Sinclairs knew more than they revealed? What if they, inheritors of Templar traditions, had access to stories of journeys across the ocean, stories carried by exiled knights who fled suppression in the 14th century? If so, Rosslyn Chapel would not merely be a church but a coded record, a stone-bound testimony that knowledge of America predated Columbus, safeguarded in secrecy until it could be inscribed in a form that would endure. The chapel itself is rich with other enigmas. Consider the apprentice pillar, a spiraling column said to have been carved by an apprentice who drew inspiration from a vision or from foreign lands. The pillar's intricate vines coil upward in a helix, reminiscent of natural patterns, mathematical harmonies, and even DNA's double helix, though centuries before such science was known. Legends claim that the master mason, upon seeing his apprentice's work, was so consumed by envy that he killed him. The story is tragic, but the pillar remains a spiral of mystery and wonder. Some see in its design the echoes of esoteric geometry, of knowledge not bound by time or culture. Could it, too, point toward secrets brought back from distant lands? Then there are the musical angels carved high in the chapel, holding instruments, bagpipes, fiddles, and others easily recognized, but also some that seem unusual for the time. Modern researchers have even proposed that the arrangement of cubes carved along arches corresponds to a pattern of sound waves, a frozen hymn etched in stone. If this is true, Rosslyn holds not just visual and symbolic knowledge, but music encoded. In architecture, a harmony bridging art and science, sacred and secret. At the heart of Rosslyn's lore lies the question of what the chapel was meant to conceal. Some traditions whisper that beneath its crypt lies the Holy Grail, hidden away by the Sinclairs as protectors of the Templar legacy. Others claim that ancient scrolls, perhaps even fragments of the Temple of Solomon itself, rest in sealed vaults below the chapel floor. Excavations have been limited, and the Sinclairs themselves have often resisted intrusive digging, leaving these possibilities to remain in the realm of speculation. What matters, perhaps more than the treasures themselves, is the pattern. For Rosslyn, like Oak Island, like the Newport Tower, seems to exist not in isolation, but as part of a network. The same geometry found in Nova Scotia appears echoed in Rosslyn's proportions. The same traditions of encoded knowledge whispered in New England are written in the chapel's arches. If America was indeed a destination for Templar voyagers, then Rosslyn may well have been both the starting point and the map, a place where knowledge was safeguarded, encoded, and symbolically transmitted. We must also linger on the Sinclairs. Themselves, the family has long been at the center of legend, not only in Scotland but across the Atlantic. It is said that Henry Sinclair, Earl of Orkney, undertook a voyage to the Americas in the late 14th century. Nearly a century before Columbus, his navigator, Antonio Zeno, recorded fragments of such a journey, later compiled into the so-called Zeno map. Though controversial, the map depicts lands across the Atlantic in ways that suggest knowledge of Newfoundland and beyond. If Henry Sinclair truly sailed westward, then Rosslyn Chapel becomes more than a repository of symbols. It becomes the architectural memorial of that voyage, a stone testimony to journeys concealed from official history. In this telling, Rosslyn is not simply a building but a cipher. It's every carving part of a greater code. The maze and aloe carvings point to America. The apprentice pillar speaks of knowledge beyond its time. The musical cubes hide a song. The geometry aligns with celestial patterns that echo those found in Templar sites across Europe and, perhaps, across the Atlantic. Together, they form a silent chorus, one that does not proclaim but whispers, "We knew, we preserved, we remembered." For those who believe, the chapel is a threshold where one can almost feel the presence of the Templars themselves. Their symbols, their geometry, their sacred rituals are believed to have flowed into the Freemasons, who in turn left their imprint on Rosslyn's walls. The chain of inheritance stretches across centuries, linking outlawed knights to Renaissance builders and perhaps to explorers who would one day set foot on North American soil. When one stands within Rosslyn, surrounded by silence and stone, it is easy to sense this continuity. The chapel feels like a crossroads, a place where timelines blur and where myth and history meet. Whether or not the maze is truly maze, whether or not the crypt conceals the Grail, the sense of deliberate concealment is undeniable. Something was encoded here, something intended to outlast persecution, time, and even memory. And so, Rosslyn becomes a mirror for the Templar story itself. Like the Order of Knights who vanished into secrecy after their suppression, the chapel's meaning remains hidden in plain sight, always present, never fully revealed. For the seeker, it is both an invitation and a challenge to read the carvings as text, to walk the aisles as though tracing a map, to look beyond the obvious and into the layers of symbol that bind one world to another. When viewed this way, Rosslyn is not simply a Scottish chapel. It is the keystone of a larger arch, connecting the sacred geometries of Europe with the mysterious landscapes of America. It ties the story of Henry Sinclair to the voyages whispered of but never confirmed. It connects the Sinclairs to the Templars to America, and America back to Rosslyn's carved maze and aloe. It is less a destination than a portal, one that urges us to reconsider what we know of history and what might have been deliberately hidden. As we let the image of Rosslyn linger in the mind's eye, lit by candlelight and echoing with imagined chants, we realize that the story of the Templars in America is not simply about movement across seas. It is also about the preservation of knowledge through architecture, through symbol, through families who carried traditions in silence. Rosslyn is not proof, but it is possibility made stone. It is the place where Europe and America meet in carved leaves and spiraling columns, and where history itself invites us to dream of what may yet lie concealed beneath its vaulted crypts. And with that thought, we leave Chapter 7 with Rosslyn's shadows still around us, as if we, too, had walked among its symbols by candlelight, hearing the faint echoes of chants that may never have been written down, only preserved in stone. In the quiet forests of New England, beneath the canopy of towering pines and oak, there lies a carving that has perplexed historians skeptics, and dreamers alike. Known as the Westford Knight, this enigmatic image etched into the granite has been held up as one of the most tantalizing clues of a Templar presence in America, long before Columbus ever set sail. The carving is faint, weathered by centuries of rain, ice, and wind, but to those who believe, its lines reveal the unmistakable outline of a medieval knight complete with sword, shield, and armor. To others, it is nothing more than scratches in stone, shaped by imagination and a desire for mystery. But like so many artifacts we've encountered on this journey, it is in the tension between skepticism and belief that the Westford Knight finds its power. The story begins in the town of Westford, Massachusetts, where in the late 19th century, a local historian named William Goodwin first drew attention to the carving. He claimed it depicted a knight of European origin, lying in repose, his sword by his side. Later enthusiasts went further, suggesting that the figure represented a fallen Templar knight who had died on American soil. Some even named him Sir James Gunn, a companion of the Scottish nobleman Henry Sinclair, whose name has appeared time and again in theories of pre-Columbian voyages. If this interpretation is true, the Westford Knight may not only prove the Templars crossed the Atlantic, it may be a literal grave marker, memorializing one of their dead. But as we've seen before, history does not yield its secrets easily. The Westford Knight is a ghostly figure, one that must be coaxed into view. If you stand before the granite boulder on which it is carved, the image is hardly obvious. Its lines have been traced and retraced over the decades by hands eager to emphasize the shape of a sword, the curve of a helmet, the straightness of armor plates. Early sketches often look more defined than the stone itself, raising the possibility that the figure is more the product of interpretation than fact. Skeptics argue that glacial scratches or natural fractures in the rock have been transformed through the power of suggestion into a knight where none ever existed. And yet, despite these objections, the legend refuses to fade. In fact, it has only grown stronger with time. In part, this is because the Westford Knight does not stand alone. When considered alongside other clues, the Newport Tower in Rhode Island, the Kensington Runestone in Minnesota, the star-shaped alignments in Nova Scotia, the carving begins to feel like another piece of a vast, hidden puzzle. It is this pattern, this recurrence of strange stonework and inexplicable markers, that gives the Westford Knight its enduring mystique. To the believers, the carving is no coincidence. They tell a story that stretches back to the fall of the Templar Order. In the early 14th century, when survivors fled persecution in Europe, according to some accounts, a band of these exiles sailed under the protection of Henry Sinclair, a Scottish noble with alleged Templar sympathies and access to ships. Their voyage, some suggest, took them across the Atlantic to the shores of Nova Scotia, and eventually down into New England. Along the way, one of their number, perhaps Sir James Gunn, died. To honor him, his companions etched his likeness into the stone of Westford, leaving behind a memorial that would outlast even their memory. It is a story steeped in both romance and tragedy. Knights in exile, carrying with them forbidden knowledge and sacred relics, finding refuge in the uncharted wilderness of a new world. The Westford Knight becomes, in this telling, not just a carving but a testimony, a message carved in stone that says, "We were here." But even those who accept the possibility of European contact before Columbus face a dilemma. How much of this story is history, and how much is legend layered onto legend? The carving itself, faint and weathered, is mute. It does not proclaim its origins. It does not offer names, dates, or explanations. Its silence is what allows such speculation to flourish. In the 20th century, renewed interest in the carving was fueled by authors and amateur historians, eager to connect the dots of Templar mystery. Frederick Pohl, a researcher fascinated by transatlantic voyages, became one of the most vocal proponents of the Sir James Gunn theory. He argued that the carving matched medieval depictions of knights and that Gunn, a member of Sinclair's expedition, had indeed been laid to rest in Massachusetts soil. This claim was bolstered, in Pohl's mind, by the presence of nearby stone structures and alignments that he believed corresponded to European traditions of sacred geometry. The appeal of such theories is undeniable. To imagine the forests of Massachusetts as the backdrop for a medieval knight's final rest is to collapse the distance between old world and new to infuse the American landscape with a hidden, chivalric past. It is also to imagine that the Templars, so often portrayed as guardians of forbidden knowledge, left behind something tangible in their flight from persecution, a trail of stone markers and enigmatic symbols pointing to their lost history. Yet the voices of doubt remain strong. Archaeologists and geologists point out that the supposed carving lacks the depth and precision one would expect from medieval stonework. The sword, shield, and helmet are discernible only when traced with chalk or highlighted in drawings. Without these enhancements, the lines appear random, as though the human eye is imposing order where none exists. This phenomenon, known as pareidolia, the tendency to see meaningful images in random patterns, is a frequent companion to debates over ancient mysteries, the face on Mars, the outlines of animals in clouds, or the shapes of saints in tree bark. All are examples of pareidolia's power. Could the Westford Knight be yet another case? A knight conjured from scratches and cracks by the desire for discovery. Even so, the persistence of the story says something about human nature. We are drawn to mysteries, to the possibility that the official record is incomplete, that secret histories lie just beneath the surface. The Westford Knight, whatever its true origin, embodies this impulse. It invites us to look harder, to question what we see, to imagine what might have been. There is also the matter of timing. The legend of Henry Sinclair's voyage, which underpins much of the Westford Knight theory, does not appear in historical sources until centuries after his death. The Zeno narrative, a 16th century text often cited as evidence of Sinclair's Atlantic journey, is itself controversial, accused of being a fabrication or at least a heavily embellished tale. This casts doubt on the entire framework that links Sinclair, the Templars, and the Westford Knight. Yet even here, ambiguity reigns, for if the Zeno narrative is entirely false, why does it contain details of geography that seem uncannily accurate for its time? And if Sinclair's voyage is at least partially true, then the presence of a carving in Massachusetts begins to seem less improbable. Over the years, the site of the Westford Knight has become a place of quiet pilgrimage. Visitors come not only to see the carving, but to touch it, to trace its faint lines with their fingers, to feel connected to something ancient and mysterious. Local groups have organized efforts to protect the stone from vandalism, and replicas have been made to preserve its image. In a sense, the knight has transcended its ambiguous origins to become a symbol of possibility, a reminder that the past may be stranger and more complex than we know. For storytellers, the knight is a gift. It allows for tales of lost voyages, secret burials, and forbidden relics hidden in the wilderness. It links the Templar mystique to the American landscape in a way that feels both improbable and oddly fitting. After all, the Templars themselves occupy a liminal space in history, half warriors, half monks, both real and mythic. To imagine their traces in America is simply to extend that liminality across the ocean. Perhaps the most compelling aspect of the Westford Knight is not whether it is real, but how it continues to provoke questions. Its ambiguity forces us to confront the limits of evidence and the role of imagination in interpreting the past. It shows us how stories take root, how a few faint lines in stone can blossom into an entire legend of voyages, burials, and lost nights, and in this sense, it is profoundly human. If we stand quietly before the stone, we might imagine the scene, as believers describe it, a group of weary voyagers, far from home, laying one of their own to rest in the alien soil of a new continent. With reverence, they carve his likeness into stone, ensuring that his memory will endure. The forest closes around them, their ships wait at anchor, and the journey continues. Centuries pass, the carving erodes, its details fade, but the story persists. We arrive, hundreds of years later, tracing the lines with our own hands, trying to catch a glimpse of the knight who came before Columbus. Whether we see him clearly or not depends on more than just the stone. It depends on what we bring with us, our hunger for mystery, our willingness to question, our openness to the possibility that history is not as complete as it seems. The Westford Knight becomes, then, not only a carving, but a mirror reflecting back our own hopes and doubts about the past. And so, the legend endures. Some will dismiss it as scratches. Others will swear it is proof of the Templars' American chapter. But in either case, the stone continues to speak, not in clear words, but in whispers. Whispers of voyages, of exiles, of lost nights, of mysteries buried beneath the trees of New England. And perhaps that is enough, not certainty, but wonder, for sometimes it is wonder, more than fact, that keeps history alive. Beneath the quiet hills of Scotland lies a chapel, whose very walls seem to whisper of secrets long concealed, a sanctuary of stone that has sparked centuries of wonder, speculation, and debate. Rosslyn Chapel, constructed in the 15th century, under the patronage of the Sinclair family, has become one of the most enigmatic sites in the Western world, drawing historians, seekers, and pilgrims alike. Its foundations rest not just upon stone, but upon layers of myth, memory, and mystery. The deeper one looks at Rosslyn, the more it becomes apparent that its story extends far beyond its physical presence. It is not simply a place of worship, it is a book carved in stone, a codex of symbols, geometry, flora, and figures whose meanings have yet to be fully deciphered. At the heart of its intrigue is a question: why would a chapel of such modest scale be adorned with such an overwhelming density of carvings, many of which seem foreign, anachronistic, and startlingly advanced for their time? To walk within Rosslyn's narrow nave is to step into a riddle whose solution may span continents and centuries, stretching across the Atlantic to pre-Columbian America and backward into the hidden streams of esoteric knowledge preserved by the Knights Templar. The story of Rosslyn is inseparable from that of its patrons, the Sinclairs, a family of Norse and Scottish origin whose lineage is steeped in legend. William Sinclair, the chapel's founder, belonged to a house that claimed descent from the Norse Jarls of Orkney. Yet their history also entwined with whispered tales of guardianship over Templar secrets. Following the dissolution of the Knights Templar in the early 14th century, rumors swirled that surviving knights carried their hidden treasures and sacred relics into exile, seeking refuge with sympathetic families and orders. Among those said to have sheltered the Templars were the Sinclairs, who not only possessed wealth and influence, but were also said to be bound by blood, an oath to the traditions of sacred geometry, gnosis, and hidden knowledge. The construction of Rosslyn Chapel, beginning in 1446, thus appears not as the vanity project of a nobleman, but as a deliberate attempt to encode, in stone, a repository of secret traditions for future generations. Every arch, column, and carving seems to carry a message, awaiting those with eyes to see. Perhaps the most startling and oft-discussed elements of Rosslyn Chapel are the carvings of plant life that should not have been known to 15th century Europe. High upon the stonework appear depictions that closely resemble maize or corn, a crop native to the Americas and unknown to Europe until after Columbus's voyage in 1492. Likewise, other carvings bear striking similarities to aloe vera, another plant whose origins and uses would not have been widely familiar in Scotland at the time. These botanical anomalies raise profound questions. Could the builders of Rosslyn Chapel have had knowledge of the New World decades before it was officially discovered? If so, what does this imply about the reach of the Templars, the Sinclairs, or other hidden networks that may have crossed the Atlantic long before Columbus? For those who believe in pre-Columbian contact, Rosslyn serves as one of the most compelling pieces of evidence, a silent testimony in stone that hints at journeys across oceans, perhaps by those who carried not only material wealth but also sacred traditions. The sheer density of symbolic carvings within Rosslyn also fuels speculation. Angels, demons, green men, and geometric patterns abound, but their arrangement seems far from random. Scholars of esoterica have suggested that the chapel encodes within its architecture a map of the cosmos, with pillars and arches aligned to celestial principles. The apprentice pillar, perhaps the most famous of Rosslyn's features, is said to embody the tree of life from Kabbalistic tradition, with its spiraling designs echoing themes of growth, connection, and divine ascent. If true, then Rosslyn is not merely a Christian chapel, but a synthesis of traditions, Christian, Jewish, pagan, and perhaps even transatlantic. The green men, whose faces emerge from foliage across the chapel, suggest continuity with older, pre-Christian fertility symbols, while the geometric lattices whisper of knowledge rooted in sacred geometry, the mathematics by which the ancients aligned temples to the stars. The connection between Rosslyn and the Templars becomes all the more provocative when one considers the fate of the order after their suppression by the Pope and the King of France in 1307. Many Templars were arrested, tortured, or executed, but some disappeared into legend. In Scotland, where papal authority was weaker due to the country's conflict with England, it is said that exiled Templars found sanctuary. The Sinclairs, bound to them by loyalty or shared vision, may have preserved their secrets. Some theories even propose that Templar fleets, laden with treasure, relics, or documents, sailed westward, perhaps as far as Nova Scotia, centuries before Columbus. The presence of maize and aloe in Rosslyn's carvings lends weight to such theories, as does the enduring belief that the Templars possessed maps of distant lands, gleaned through ancient knowledge or exploratory voyages. Rosslyn Chapel, then, becomes not merely a religious site, but a kind of reliquary of memory, a hidden archive that encodes the survival of the Templar mission. Rosslyn's architecture itself seems designed to provoke mystery. The chapel is incomplete. Its intended, cross-shaped plan truncated. Some believe this was deliberate, a gesture that left the work open-ended, symbolizing a story yet to be finished. Others see in its unfinished state a parallel to esoteric initiation, where the seeker is invited to complete the work inwardly, deciphering hidden meanings for themselves. The apprentice pillar's legend further heightens this air of secrecy. According to tradition, the pillar was carved by an apprentice who, inspired by a vision, created it with such skill that his master, overcome with jealousy, murdered him. The story echoes themes of sacrifice, revelation, and the transmission of forbidden knowledge, all resonant with the myths of hidden brotherhoods, like the Templars and later the Freemasons, who would come to see Rosslyn as a symbolic sanctuary. The Masonic connection to Rosslyn is particularly striking. Many of the symbols in the chapel resonate strongly with Masonic ritual and iconography, leading some to believe that Rosslyn served as a kind of proto-Masonic temple. The Sinclairs themselves would later become deeply entwined with the Freemasons, with William Sinclair recognized as a Grand Master. This continuity suggests that Rosslyn served as a bridge preserving Templar traditions through the turbulence of the Middle Ages until they could be reborn in new forms. For Freemasons, Rosslyn represents a sacred inheritance, a site where stone itself bears witness to the lineage of esoteric wisdom. The carvings of maize and aloe, if indeed they are what they seem, could then be understood not simply as botanical oddities, but as markers of a hidden lineage of knowledge, passed across oceans and centuries, awaiting recognition by those initiated into the mysteries. But one does not need to be an initiate to feel the strange power of Rosslyn Chapel. Visitors report an atmosphere unlike any other church, a heaviness, a presence, a sense that the building itself is alive with meaning. The interplay of light and shadow across its carvings seems to shift with the seasons, as if the chapel were designed to align not only with the cosmos, but with the inner lives of those who enter it. The density of symbols creates a sense of overwhelming richness, as if each stone were a word in a vast, indecipherable language. To walk through Rosslyn is to feel oneself immersed in a story that is both deeply human and profoundly otherworldly, a narrative that has resisted every attempt at closure. The enduring fascination with Rosslyn Chapel lies not simply in its beauty, but in its refusal to yield its secrets. Every carving provokes a question. Every theory opens onto another. Was it a secret Templar vault, a proto-Masonic temple, or a coded map of transatlantic voyages? Was it built to conceal, to preserve, or to reveal? Perhaps it is all these things at once. A paradoxical structure whose very purpose is to defy singular interpretation. What is certain is that Rosslyn represents one of the most ambitious attempts to crystallize hidden knowledge in stone, a sanctuary of mystery whose legacy continues to ripple outward. In the end, Rosslyn Chapel may be understood as both a physical structure and a myth in motion. Its stones stand immovable, yet its meanings shift with each generation that approaches it. For those who seek evidence of pre-Columbian contact, it offers carvings that defy explanation. For Freemasons, it is a shrine to lineage and initiation. For historians, it is a puzzle of patronage, architecture, and cultural exchange. And for all who enter, it is a place of wonder, a reminder that history is not only what is written in books, but also what is carved in stone, whispered in legend, and preserved in the silence of sacred spaces. To study Rosslyn is to recognize that some mysteries are not meant to be solved, but to be contemplated, carrying us deeper into the recognition that the past is never as distant or as finished as we might believe. Beneath the weight of legend and history, a new path emerges, one that leads us deeper into the labyrinth of symbols, stonework, and whispers of hidden voyages. The Newport Tower, the Kensington Run of Stone, and the Westford Knight may each stand as fragments of mystery, but another layer begins to unfold as we turn our gaze toward a family and a site whose presence continues to puzzle historians, architects, and seekers alike. The Sinclair family, bound intimately with the Templars and their legacy, stands at the heart of this enigma, and with them comes Rosslyn Chapel, a place whose stones speak a language that has not yet been fully deciphered. It is here, in this intricately carved structure in Scotland, that many claim the echoes of pre-Columbian contact. Secret Templar knowledge and the very heart of a forbidden history lie hidden in plain sight. Imagine stepping into Rosslyn Chapel for the first time. The air feels heavy, not with dust but with a kind of reverence, as if the very stones remember stories too dangerous to be told. Every surface is carved, every arch and column alive with detail that seems excessive at first glance, but becomes overwhelming once the eyes begin to pick apart its symbolism. Angels, plants, stars, strange figures, each motif suggesting layers of meaning far beyond the reach of a casual observer. To some, This is merely Gothic artistry at its finest. To others, it is a living library, a codex in stone, preserving truths about voyages, relics, and a hidden continuity between the Knights Templar and the secretive orders that came after them. One of the most tantalizing mysteries lies within the carvings of plants maize and aloe vera flora native to the Americas, carved into the stonework of the chapel a full half-century before Columbus set foot across the Atlantic. If these depictions are what they appear to be, then someone connected to the Sinclairs, perhaps the Templars themselves, had seen the New World long before the 15th century. Skeptics argue that the resemblance is coincidental, that medieval artists carved stylized foliage without botanical accuracy. Yet when one stands before the stone, the stalks, the leaves, the forms etched with such clarity, it is difficult to dismiss the suggestion. Why would such precise renderings appear in a chapel supposedly built with European flora in mind? Unless the builders were referencing knowledge that had crossed the ocean before it was supposed to. And this is where the Sinclair family enters the stage with force. Henry Sinclair, Earl of Orkney, is said in some accounts to have embarked on a voyage to North America in the late 14th century, nearly a century before Columbus. These claims, preserved in oral traditions and the controversial Zeno narrative, suggest that Sinclair's expedition reached Nova Scotia, that he established contact with the indigenous peoples, and that he may even have left markers of his presence. If this is true, then Rosslyn Chapel might not simply be a place of worship, but a monument, a cryptogram in stone, encoding knowledge of these journeys, preserving them for those with eyes trained to see. The architecture itself fuels the speculation. Rosslyn is not arranged like an ordinary chapel. Its proportions align with sacred geometry, hinting at mathematical systems that echo across Templar and Masonic traditions. The chapel's intricate design has been compared to the structure of Solomon's temple, the very blueprint that obsessed the Templars and guided their spiritual and esoteric practices. Was Rosslyn intended as a kind of earthly reflection of that lost temple, built not just to honor God, but to conceal and protect knowledge too dangerous for open proclamation? To walk within its walls is to feel that every angle, every symbol, was chosen with deliberate intent, a web of secrecy that binds the physical space to invisible truths. The carvings themselves are a gallery of contradictions. Angels hold strange instruments. Figures appear engaged in symbolic acts that defy simple interpretation. The apprentice pillar, famous for its ornate spiral design, is said to conceal layers of meaning about life, death, and hidden wisdom. Some claim the pillars, carvings encode maps of DNA structures or geometric harmonics that were centuries ahead of their time. Others suggest that the story of the master mason and the apprentice associated with the pillar is an allegory for the transmission of forbidden knowledge passed in fragments, at great risk, between initiates. In this way, Rosslyn ceases to be a chapel at all and becomes something more akin to an ark, a vessel of transmission across generations. The Templar connections become clearer when we recall that the Sinclair family was known for its sympathies with the order. In the aftermath of the Templar suppression in the early 14th century, Scotland became a refuge for knights who escaped the burning pyres of France. The Battle of Bannockburn in 1314 is sometimes said to have been tipped in Robert the Bruce's favor by the intervention of Templar warriors. Whether true or not, the Sinclairs' later embrace of Masonic traditions, their architectural patronage, and their preservation of symbols strongly associated with Templar heritage all suggest continuity. Rosslyn Chapel, commissioned by William Sinclair in the mid-15th century, may well have been the flowering of this inheritance, a chapel in name, but in essence a crypt, a cipher, a sanctuary of knowledge stretching back to Jerusalem and perhaps across the Atlantic. consider also the interplay of light within the chapel. Scholars and mystics alike have observed how sunlight, passing through the windows at certain times of year, highlights specific carvings, as though the chapel were designed not just as a static monument, but as a kind of astronomical clock, revealing layers of meaning only in alignment with the heavens. This recalls the Templars' fascination with celestial patterns, with Venus cycles, and with the idea that sacred architecture could mirror the harmony of the cosmos. If Rosslyn encodes voyages, relics, and secrets, perhaps it also encodes time, waiting for moments when light itself would unlock messages hidden in shadow. But perhaps the most enduring mystery of Rosslyn is not in its carvings, but in what it is said to conceal. For centuries, legends have claimed that the chapel's sealed vaults hide treasures beyond imagination, relics brought from the Holy Land by the Templars, perhaps even the Holy Grail itself. Excavations have been attempted, rumors whispered, but the vaults remain closed, their secrets untouched. In this way, the chapel holds itself apart, not merely as a work of medieval art, but as a guardian of mystery. The very fact that its doors have not yielded their treasures keeps the legend alive, fueling speculation that the Sinclairs deliberately built the chapel not just to honor God, but to encase a legacy that could not safely rest anywhere else. As we reflect on Rosslyn's role, we begin to see how it fits into the larger web of our journey. The Runestone in Minnesota, the Westford Knight in Massachusetts, the Newport Tower in Rhode Island, each a fragment, a whisper of Templar presence. Across the ocean, Rosslyn Chapel may be the key that ties them together, the mother lode of symbolism that confirms that these scattered markers were not accidents, but part of a deliberate pattern. The carvings of maize and aloe connect to Nova Scotia voyages, just as the chapel's sacred geometry links back to Jerusalem and forward to Freemasonry. If all these threads are woven into Rosslyn, then perhaps it is not a chapel at all, but a ciphered map, a map not of land and sea, but of meaning itself, pointing both backward and forward in time. And so, Rosslyn remains a paradox. To the faithful, it is a beautiful chapel filled with reverence. To tourists, it is a masterpiece of medieval stonework. But to those who trace the shadow of the Templars across history, it is something far more dangerous, a library carved in stone, a vault of encoded secrets, a signpost to a hidden history that challenges the very story we are told of discovery and conquest. Whether the maize and aloe are proof of voyages before Columbus, or whether they are misinterpretations, the fact remains that Rosslyn has become an anchor point in the theory of pre-Columbian Templar presence. Its stones have drawn seekers for centuries, and they will continue to do so, for they whisper of a time when faith, geometry, and forbidden knowledge intertwined to preserve a story not meant for ordinary ears. And as the shadows lengthen inside the chapel, as light catches once more on the carvings of strange plants and spiraling pillars, we are left with the sense that Rosslyn does not just hold secrets. It is a secret, a living enigma, patiently waiting for us to decipher it. And in that silence, one question rises: did the Templars, through the Sinclairs and their stone codex, leave us a map to a forgotten chapter of human history, carved into stone that still speaks, if only we are willing to listen? The chill of history grows colder as we pass through the stones of Rosslyn Chapel and drift deeper into the shadows of hidden knowledge. By now, patterns have begun to emerge, the persistence of symbols, the careful concealment of secrets in architecture, and the unbroken thread that seems to bind the Templars across centuries and oceans. And yet, one question lingers at the heart of this journey: what exactly were they hiding? If their treasures were not simply gold and silver, if their voyages across unknown seas were not just quests for land or conquest, then what knowledge was so dangerous, so earth-shattering, that entire institutions of power would be built to conceal it? To answer this, we must descend even further into the labyrinth of hidden Christianity, encoded gospels, and forbidden rites that stretch back to the very origins of the faith itself. Here, at the threshold of chapter 11, the shadows of the Vatican loom large. For centuries, the Church declared itself the sole guardian of truth, the exclusive interpreter of Scripture, the final word on salvation and doctrine. But history tells a different story, one of suppression, of texts cast aside, of alternative Christianities buried not because they were false, but because they were threatening. In this silence, the Templars may have found their true calling, not only as warriors of faith or guardians of pilgrims, but as protectors of forbidden knowledge. Perhaps this is why their trail seems to merge seamlessly with that of the hidden Gospels, those tantalizing fragments of early Christianity that paint a picture very different from the one enshrined in stone cathedrals and papal decrees. Imagine, for a moment, the ancient desert communities where Christianity first spread. Small gatherings in candlelit rooms, whispered teachings of a Christ not of conquest, but of inner light, of knowledge as salvation. These communities often elevated women as teachers and leaders, spoke of a divine spark within every human soul, and placed gnosis direct knowledge of the divine above rigid laws and priestly hierarchies. These teachings lived on in texts like the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip, and the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, each one painting Christ not as a distant Savior, to be worshipped through intermediaries, but as a revealer of hidden wisdom, accessible to all. To embrace such teachings meant empowerment for the common believer, a collapse of the rigid control that bishops and councils sought to impose. And so, one by one, these Gospels were declared heretical, hunted down, burned, and erased from history. But nothing that touches the human spirit can ever be fully destroyed. These texts survived in fragments, hidden away in jars of clay buried in Egyptian sands, preserved in whispered traditions that reemerged centuries later in the mystical movements of Europe. Here, once again, the Templars appear as silent custodians. It is whispered that among the treasures they retrieved from beneath the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem were not only relics of gold, but scrolls, manuscripts, fragments of forgotten scripture. Could it be that in their hands lay the remnants of these forbidden Gospels, records of a Christianity far older and far more radical than the one enforced by Rome? To understand why this would matter, we must consider the climate of medieval Europe. Faith was not just a private matter of belief. It was the very foundation of social and political power. To question the Church was to question kings, emperors, and the very order of society. If the Templars truly held texts that suggested Christ had not established a hierarchical church, that salvation lay in personal knowledge rather than obedience, that women had once held equal roles in the sacred, such knowledge would be dynamite, capable of toppling centuries of carefully constructed authority. No wonder the Vatican might have looked upon the Templars with suspicion, even fear. This may also explain the strange duality of the Templars' image. On one hand, they were celebrated as Christ's warriors, defenders of the faith, symbols of Christian power in the Holy Land. On the other, whispers accused them of heresy, of blasphemy, of secret rituals that mocked the very faith they were sworn to defend. Perhaps these were not contradictions at all, but reflections of a hidden truth that beneath the surface of orthodoxy, they were keepers of an older Christianity, one rooted in the forbidden Gospels, one that Rome had tried to erase. Their rituals, so mysterious and unsettling to outsiders, may not have been satanic perversions, but echoes of those early, suppressed traditions that valued secrecy, initiation, and direct encounter with the divine. The deeper we explore this possibility, the more connections begin to surface. Rosslyn Chapel itself becomes more than a repository of Templar symbols. It becomes a living gospel carved in stone, perhaps encoding the very teachings that the Vatican once sought to obliterate. The twin pillars, the hidden labyrinthine carvings, the imagery of growth, knowledge, and sacred balance, each of these could be interpreted as echoes of Gnostic thought, of the belief that salvation lay not in blind obedience, but in awakening to the knowledge of one's own divine spark. In this light, the presence of maize and aloe vera in Rosslyn's carvings takes on a new dimension. Not only do they hint at transatlantic voyages, but also at a worldview that transcended the limits of geography, culture, and orthodox doctrine. And so, Chapter 11 leads us into the heart of a dangerous possibility. The Templars, far from being simply knights and bankers, may have been preservers of an alternative Christianity, a faith of inner light, equality, and hidden wisdom, one that the Vatican sought to bury forever. The stakes of this theory could not be higher, for it suggests that the very foundations of Christian history, as we have been taught to understand them, rest upon suppression and concealment. What if the Templars' voyages to the New World, their encoded architecture, their secret symbols, were all part of an effort to safeguard this alternative vision of Christianity, to plant it in hidden places where it might survive the persecutions of empire and church alike? As we move forward, we begin to see how all the fragments of our journey might connect. The run stone with its enigmatic hooked X, perhaps symbolizing the sacred feminine suppressed by Rome, the Newport Tower, aligned with celestial patterns, perhaps a hidden temple of Gnosis, the Venus families who carried traditions of balance, knowledge, and sacred geometry across generations. Rosslyn Chapel, a cathedral of stone where every carving whispers of hidden truths. These may not be scattered mysteries at all, but pieces of one grand tapestry, a tapestry woven by those who refuse to let forbidden knowledge die. The Vatican's silence becomes deafening in this context. For centuries, it has been the keeper not only of accepted scripture, but also of the apocryphal, the forbidden, the suppressed. Deep within the vaults of the apostolic library lie countless manuscripts that the world has never seen, texts too dangerous to release, too disruptive to doctrine. If the Templars truly tapped into this current of hidden Christianity, then their destruction was inevitable. They had to be erased, their order shattered, their secrets absorbed or buried. And yet, like the forbidden Gospels themselves, their memory refuses to vanish. It lingers in stone, in legend, in the restless curiosity of those who refuse to accept the official story. Perhaps this is why the story of the Templars continues to captivate us today. At its heart, it is not just a story of knights or treasure. It is a story of knowledge, of the human hunger to preserve truth in the face of oppression. It is the same hunger that led early Christian communities to bury their Gospels in the sands of Nag Hammadi. It is the same hunger that led medieval builders to encode symbols into their churches. It is the same hunger that drove explorers to chart forbidden seas. And it is the same hunger that drives us, centuries later, to piece together the fragments and ask the questions that history has tried to silence. And so, as Chapter 11 comes to a close, the weight of this journey grows heavier. We are no longer dealing merely with the possibility of Templars in America or hidden treasures buried beneath chapels. We are confronting the possibility that the Templars were guardians of an alternative Christianity, one that the Vatican could not allow to flourish. What lies ahead, then, is not only the question of what happened to their physical treasures, but of whether their spiritual treasure, the hidden Gospels, the forbidden teachings, survived, encoded in symbols and carried across oceans. If this is true, then the story of the Templars is not just history, it is prophecy, waiting to be fulfilled in our rediscovery of the truths they once guarded. In the hushed glow of flickering torchlight, the narrative of our journey continues, winding deeper into the labyrinth of mysteries left behind by the Knights Templar and the whispered possibilities of their voyages across the Atlantic. The threads of evidence we've followed so far have been carved into stone, etched into maps, hidden in geometry, and whispered through sacred architecture. Yet in this chapter, we turn our gaze toward an element often overlooked, but no less crucial: the lived environments, the landscapes themselves, and how these natural canvases may have held secret alignments, hidden codes, and deliberate placements by those who sought to veil their presence in subtle harmony with the land and the stars. To dismiss these alignments as mere coincidence is tempting, for the skeptic in all of us wants simplicity. But as patterns multiply, as geometry reappears in locations separated by oceans and centuries, a question begins to rise like mist from the forest floor. Did the Templars, or those carrying their wisdom, use the very world as their cryptic manuscript? Imagine for a moment the vast forests and untouched wilderness of what is now North America, landscapes both untamed and uncharted to European eyes of the medieval period. For travelers seeking refuge and concealment, these places would have offered both sanctuary and secrecy. But to those trained in sacred geometry, skilled in reading the stars and inscribing patterns onto the earth, the land was more than wilderness. It was a canvas for living symbols. From Nova Scotia to New England, from the stony shores to the inland rivers, we find whispers of geometric patterns that seem to point not to accident, but to design. Circles, crosses, and compass roses emerge in the placement of towers, cairns, stone markers, and even natural features accentuated with subtle shaping. To dismiss each as random would be one thing, but when overlaid, when studied as a whole, the harmonies become undeniable. Could it be that the Templars, or at least those who preserved their lore, wove their legacy into the very soil and stone of the New World? One compelling thread is found in the enigmatic Newport Tower of Rhode Island. We've touched upon it before, but here, in the larger tapestry, its role grows more profound. Rising with an architectural form alien to colonial America, it bears striking resemblances to round churches of Templar Europe. Scholars debate endlessly whether it was a mere windmill or something far more deliberate. Yet, when viewed not in isolation, but as part of a larger geometric network, its placement begins to suggest intent. Researchers mapping alignments between Newport Tower, the Westford Knight carving in Massachusetts, and further north toward Oak Island have observed patterns echoing the sacred geometries of European cathedrals. It is as though these sites were strung like beads on an invisible line of meaning, aligned not merely by chance, but by a guiding hand intent on encoding presence without inscription. The land itself, then, becomes the cathedral, the wilderness transformed into a silent testament to survival, secrecy, and perhaps sanctity. Consider Oak Island, shrouded in its legend of buried treasure and elaborate traps. Some theories suggest that the elaborate engineering beneath the island was not merely to conceal wealth, but to inscribe meaning into the earth itself. The shafts and tunnels, if viewed symbolically, may echo the hidden chambers of Solomon's Temple, itself the spiritual heart of Templar mythology. What if Oak Island was not simply a vault, but a reliquary, a sacred space mirrored in mud and stone across the ocean? Alignments between Oak Island and other sites, particularly in Nova Scotia, further deepen the possibility. It is as though an invisible hand sought to transpose the holy geometry of the old world into the new, bridging continents not only with ships but with symbols. The idea of sacred geometry carried into the Americas by the Templars may sound fantastical, yet we must remember that the Templars were heirs to traditions older than themselves. Geometry was their language of divine truth, inherited through esoteric channels stretching back to Pythagoras, Plato, and perhaps even Egypt's temple builders. To them, numbers were not abstractions, but revelations, sacred keys unlocking the mind of God, the placement of buildings, the shape of crosses, the proportions of sacred chambers, all were inscribed with intention. If they did reach the shores of America, is it so implausible that they would extend this tradition, embedding their legacy in the new land as discreetly as they had in the old? What looks to us like scattered curiosities may have, to them, been the very scaffolding of their hidden purpose. Equally compelling is the theory that alignments were not merely terrestrial but celestial, much like the builders of Stonehenge or the architects of the pyramids. The Templars may have sought to anchor their presence to the heavens. Certain sites across New England and Nova Scotia appear to align with solstices, equinoxes, and even the cycles of Venus, a planet deeply tied to esoteric traditions of light, love, and hidden wisdom. The so-called Venus families, long whispered of in conspiracy lore, believed that their bloodlines carried sacred knowledge bound to the planet's cycle. Could their kin, allied with or descended from the Templars, have extended this tradition into the New World when the Newport Tower frames the rising sun on solstice morning? It seems less like a windmill's happenstance and more like a cosmic alignment. The stars, after all, do not lie. Now, let us pause and reflect on the psychology of concealment. For the Templars, secrecy was survival. After their persecution in the 14th century, their remnants scattered, their rituals cloaked, their knowledge veiled in allegory and code. To openly inscribe their presence in America would have been folly, yet to leave nothing would have been equally unthinkable. For the essence of their mission, whatever it truly was, required continuity. The solution lay in the subtle, the carving of a knight into stone, the construction of a tower whose purpose eludes simple explanation, the burying of a cross beneath layers of earth, the alignment of sites across distances that, to the uninitiated, appear random. Each clue was a whisper, intended not for their contemporaries, but for those centuries later who might have the patience to listen. Skeptics will argue, as they always have, that humans are pattern seekers, eager to impose meaning on chaos. And indeed, this is true. But history shows us that sacred geometry was not invention, but obsession to those in the medieval, esoteric tradition. Entire cathedrals were constructed as embodiments of divine mathematics. Pilgrimage routes were mapped not only to reach holy sites, but to inscribe crosses across the very landscape of Europe. To believe that such practices might have crossed the ocean with fleeing Templars or their allies is not a leap into fantasy, but a continuation of a documented pattern. The difference lies only in geography. Picture, then, a group of weary but resolute voyagers, perhaps led by a knight or a mason schooled in the mysteries of proportion, disembarking upon a rocky Nova Scotian shore. To them, the land is raw and unshaped, yet also a blank manuscript. They set to work not with quill and ink, but with stone and compass. A cairn is raised here, aligned with the stars. A cross is etched into stone there, its arms measured with precision. A tower rises farther south, its arches aligned to frame the sun at a sacred moment of the year, and beneath the soil, in caverns carved with care, treasures both material and symbolic are sealed away, guarded not merely by traps, but by geometry itself. For to tamper with such designs without knowledge was to invite ruin. Only those who knew the key would unlock the vault. As the centuries passed, settlers, farmers, and wanderers stumbled upon these remnants, puzzled but largely uncomprehending. A tower mistaken for a mill, a weathered stone carving dismissed as colonial graffiti, a mysterious flood-trapped pit reduced to legend. The whispers endured, but the language had been forgotten. Yet in our time, as technology allows us to map alignments with precision, as satellite imagery reveals patterns invisible from the ground, the veil begins to lift. Geometry reemerges, and with it the possibility that the Templars indeed walked these lands, their footsteps hidden not in documents, but in the earth itself. And so, the question that lingers is not only whether the Templars reached America, but whether they reshaped parts of its wilderness into a cathedral of symbols. If true, then their presence is not lost. It is all around us, waiting for eyes, trained in patience and patterns. The land itself, in this view, becomes their scripture. To walk its forests and shores with awareness is to read the margins of a text left unfinished, awaiting its final readers, you, me, and those daring enough to consider that history's boundaries are not as fixed as we once believed. Beneath the surface of the well-worn narratives we have been exploring, another theme has quietly waited to step into the light, a theme that has been present in the hidden Gospels, in the scattered fragments of Templar lore, and in the whispered traditions carried across centuries. This is the role of women in the mystical undercurrents of Christianity, a subject that history has often obscured, silenced, or rewritten. Yet when one pauses and listens, the presence of women is not only there, it is central, it is powerful, and it is transformative. What we find in these forgotten voices is not a passive echo of the dominant traditions, but an active reshaping of the spiritual vision itself. This chapter invites us into that hidden world where female disciples, teachers, prophets, and initiates left an indelible mark on the spiritual imagination of both the East and West, often in ways that still ripple beneath the surface of religious traditions today. When we turn to the canonical texts, the Gospels that were chosen to form the bedrock of the Church, the role of women is often minimized. Yet even here, the traces remain too strong to be entirely erased. Mary Magdalene stands at the foot of the cross when nearly all the male disciples have fled. She is the first to the tomb, the first to witness the resurrection, and the first to proclaim it. This, in itself, is extraordinary. But in the hidden Gospels, the texts buried in jars in the Egyptian desert and preserved only by chance, her role is elevated to something far greater. She is not only a witness, she is a confidant, a recipient of secret teachings, and in some traditions, the one disciple who truly understood the message of Christ in its fullness. The Gospel of Mary is one of the clearest and most striking examples, found in fragments. This text records her as the one who comforts the disciples after the crucifixion, the one who explains the mysteries of the soul's journey through the realms of matter, and the one whom Christ trusted with his most profound insights. In this telling, Peter and others resist her authority, questioning how a woman could have been the recipient of such hidden truths. Yet Levi defends her, saying that if Christ deemed her worthy, who are they to reject her? It is a moment of tension that echoes down the centuries, embodying the conflict between the institutional drive to suppress female authority and the undeniable reality of women as vessels of wisdom. In the Pistis Sophia, another complex Gnostic gospel, Sophia herself, meaning wisdom, takes on a mythic role. She is cast as a divine being who falls into the lower realms, who suffers, who seeks redemption, and who is ultimately restored through the help of Christ. It is not difficult to see in Sophia an allegory for humanity's condition, but also for the feminine aspect of divinity itself, suppressed yet resilient, fallen yet rising again. The Gnostic imagination often framed the spiritual struggle as a balance between masculine and feminine principles, suggesting that without acknowledging both, one could never reach wholeness. From the perspective of the Templars and the esoteric traditions that may have drawn upon these suppressed streams of thought, the feminine held a subtle but undeniable power. The Grail legends, for example, often place women at the heart of the mystery. The Grail is not simply a cup. It is a vessel, a womb, a symbol of generative life. In many of the Arthurian stories, It is women who guard the Grail, who initiate the Knights into its mysteries, or who test their worthiness. The Templar quest, intertwined with the Grail, was therefore not only about conquest, treasure, or holy war. It was about initiation into something deeper, something that required the wisdom of the feminine. Rosslyn Chapel, which we explored in earlier chapters, is another place where the feminine presence seems etched into stone itself. Among the carvings are not only the flora of distant lands and the geometries of hidden knowledge, but also figures that embody Marian devotion, sacred fertility, and the union of opposites. The chapel seems to hold within it a balance, a reminder that the sacred cannot be reduced to one side of the divine polarity, and in this sense, it resonates with the hidden gospels that whispered of a world where women were not merely silent followers but active conduits of the sacred. The suppression of these voices was not accidental. As the Church centralized its authority, it sought to control not only which texts were read, but also who was permitted to speak. Women who claimed visions, who taught, who led, were often labeled heretics or witches, and yet, in the underground currents of spirituality and the mysticism of Hildegard of Bingen, in the visions of Julian of Norwich, in the secret gatherings of Gnostic circles, the feminine voice continued to speak. These women, like Mary Magdalene before them, became bearers of visions too expansive to be contained by orthodoxy. The healing traditions, too, were deeply intertwined with the feminine. Many of the hidden gospels connect knowledge with healing, suggesting that the act of understanding gnosis was itself a form of restoration. Women, as midwives, herbalists, and healers, carried this knowledge in ways that threatened the institutional monopoly of the Church to heal outside the sanctioned channels. To teach outside the authorized texts was to undermine authority, and yet communities often trusted these women, turning to them for both physical and spiritual care. Even within the Templar mythos, there are hints of this hidden role. While the knights themselves were men, bound by vows and by the martial structures of their time, their legends consistently orbit around feminine symbols: the Grail, the Virgin, Sophia, Magdalene. It is as though the Order, consciously or not, preserved a space for the feminine mystery within its austere architecture of discipline and secrecy. The very act of guarding, of hiding, of preserving, can itself be read as a form of protection, of a wisdom too dangerous to be left in the open. If we follow these threads into the New World, into the legends of Templar presence in America, the question arises, did they carry with them not only treasure and maps, but also fragments of this suppressed wisdom, the sacred geometries we find in sites aligned with stars, the echo of Grail legends and strange carvings and artifacts, the quiet persistence of Marian devotion in places far from Rome? All these could be read as whispers of a tradition that never entirely died, a tradition in which the feminine principle was not erased but hidden, waiting for rediscovery. To bring this theme into focus is not simply to highlight the role of women as historical figures. Though that is important, it is also to recognize the deeper pattern that wisdom, when suppressed in one form, finds another, that the sacred feminine, when silenced in the pulpit, speaks through vision, through symbol, through myth, that the Grail itself, whether as cup, as bloodline, or as divine vessel, remains a feminine symbol at the heart of the Western esoteric imagination. And so, as we draw closer to the hidden center of this story, we realize that the Templar mystery is not only about knights and treasure, maps and monuments. It is also about something more intimate, more universal: the recognition that the sacred cannot be confined to one gender, one voice, or one institution. The lost Gospels remind us that women carried the torch of wisdom in the darkest times, and that their voices, though suppressed, continue to resonate. Rosslyn's stones remind us that sacred architecture itself can embody balance, and the Grail, ever elusive, reminds us that the most precious treasure is not gold or power, but wholeness, the union of what has been divided. In this light, the story of the Templars is also the story of recovery. It is about piecing together the fragments not only of texts and artifacts, but of a worldview that acknowledged the full spectrum of the divine. To listen to the hidden voices of women in early Christianity is to recognize that our understanding of history, like the chapel, is incomplete until we see the whole. It is to realize that the greatest secret may not be a chest of treasure buried beneath stone, but a wisdom buried in the margins of texts, in the silence of archives, in the forbidden visions that dared to speak of balance. And perhaps that is why these themes continue to captivate us. For in a world still wrestling with imbalance, still struggling to recognize the voices once silenced, the hidden Gospels and the Templar myths offer not only mystery but hope. Hope that what was suppressed can be recovered. Hope that what was divided can be made whole. Hope that the sacred, in all its fullness, still waits for those who dare to seek it. As we follow the threads of history into yet another hidden layer, our journey now leads us deeper into the forbidden texts themselves, those Gospels and fragments deliberately excluded from the canon and buried beneath centuries of theological politics. Here, in the words of forgotten scribes and mystics, lies a different voice of early Christianity, one that does not always agree with the narrative we have inherited, but instead dares to ask questions, to challenge authority, and to preserve alternative visions of Christ's teachings. Chapter 14 takes us inside this mysterious world of forbidden Gospels, where the boundaries between revelation and heresy blur, and where the search for spiritual truth often ran headlong into the iron will of institutions determined to control belief. Imagine for a moment the dusty caves of Nag Hammadi in Egypt, where in 1945 a farmer stumbled upon a sealed jar that contained ancient manuscripts, texts untouched for nearly 1,600 years. Within those pages, the so-called Gnostic Gospels revealed a Christ who was less a ruler demanding obedience and more a guide urging inner discovery, a teacher whispering that the kingdom of heaven lies within. These revelations, long suppressed, invite us to reconsider not only who Christ was, but what early followers believed was the path to salvation. Instead of blind submission, they spoke of knowledge gnosis as the key, a dangerous idea to an emerging church that relied on hierarchy and obedience to maintain power. And yet, these forbidden writings continue to whisper through the centuries, challenging us to ask what was lost when they were silenced. The Gospel of Thomas is perhaps the most haunting example. Unlike the familiar narratives of miracles and crucifixion, this text presents 114 sayings attributed to Jesus, enigmatic, poetic, and startlingly intimate. In one passage, Jesus tells his followers, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you." It is a call to turn inward, to discover divine truth already seated in the human soul. For the bishops of the early church, however, this was too dangerous a message. If the divine was already within every believer, then what need was there for priests, bishops, or elaborate rituals? The Gospel of Thomas threatened the very structure of authority, and so it was cast aside, buried, and condemned as heresy. Yet today, it stands as a mirror, reflecting an alternative path of Christianity, one based on personal awakening rather than institutional control. Closely linked is the Gospel of Mary, a fragmentary but powerful text that gives voice to Mary Magdalene in ways the canonical Gospels do not. Here she is not the silent witness, not merely the penitent sinner later invented by tradition, but a true apostle, entrusted with secret teachings of Christ that the male disciples struggle to accept. In one passage, she comforts them, offering spiritual wisdom at a moment of fear and doubt. Yet Peter questions her authority, unable to accept that a woman could hold the keys to revelation. The conflict preserved in this gospel mirrors the struggles of early Christianity itself, whose voices would be heard and whose voices would be silenced. For centuries, Mary Magdalene's leadership was erased, her image distorted, her gospel hidden away. But now, with these texts resurfacing, we glimpse the outlines of a lost Christianity where women were not only followers, but leaders and teachers. Another striking example is the Gospel of Judas, a text that turns one of history's most vilified figures upside down. Rather than the ultimate traitor, Judas is portrayed as the disciple who understood Jesus best, the one chosen to carry out the act that would set the divine plan in motion. In this vision, Judas is not condemned but exalted, entrusted with a secret role far beyond the comprehension of the others. Such a radical reimagining shakes the very foundations of traditional theology, for it forces us to reconsider the meaning of betrayal, sacrifice, and destiny. Was Judas, long cursed by tradition, actually a chosen instrument of salvation? The forbidden gospel dares to ask. These texts, taken together, form a chorus of alternative Christianities, each with its own vision of truth. Some emphasize the hidden wisdom of Christ, others the role of women, others still a cosmic struggle between light and darkness that plays out not only in the heavens, but within the human heart. What unites them is their rejection by the emerging Orthodox Church, which, by the late 4th century, sought to define one clear path and condemn all others as heresy. Councils were convened, canons established, and the winners wrote the narrative that would endure. Yet for every gospel preserved in the New Testament, many others were destroyed, their voices silenced for centuries. Why were these gospels so threatening? The answer lies not only in theology, but in power, a religion built on personal revelation, where the divine spark lies within and women hold equal authority, cannot be easily governed. It resists hierarchy. It resists uniformity. It resists control. The Church, facing both internal disputes and external threats, needed unity above all. To ensure that unity, it drew boundaries between orthodoxy and heresy, between sacred scripture and dangerous forgery. And so the forbidden gospels were hidden away, their words surviving only in fragments, buried manuscripts, or scattered references in the writings of their opponents. Yet even in their suppression, these gospels exert a strange and haunting power. They remind us that history is not inevitable, that the Christianity we know today could have taken very different forms. Imagine a world where the gospel of Mary shaped doctrine, where women stood at the center of faith rather than at its margins. Imagine a church that embraced the gospel of Thomas, teaching that salvation lies not in obedience, but in awakening the divine within. Imagine a Christianity where Judas was remembered not as the cursed betrayer, but as the faithful friend who bore a terrible burden in service of a higher plan. These are not idle fantasies. They are glimpses of paths not taken, roads that history closed off, but which still echo in our imagination. The rediscovery of these texts in the modern era has reopened old wounds and sparked new debates. Scholars wrestle with their authenticity, their meaning, and their implications. Believers grapple with what it means if Jesus' words were more varied, more radical than tradition has allowed. And institutions, still wary, often respond with silence or dismissal, fearful of what such revelations might mean for centuries of established doctrine. Yet the forbidden gospels persist, stubborn and unyielding, refusing to be forgotten. They continue to whisper in the quiet spaces of scholarship and the restless corners of faith, that there is always more to the story than what we have been told. As we sit with these words, as we imagine the hands that wrote them, the communities that cherished them, and the forces that tried to erase them, We are reminded that history is not only about what survives, but also about what is lost. The forbidden Gospels are fragments of a shattered mirror, each reflecting a different angle of Christ's light. To piece them together is to see a fuller, more complex picture, one that unsettles, provokes, and inspires. And in their survival, fragile yet enduring, they offer us an invitation to look again, to listen deeply, and to ask what truths may yet be waiting, hidden in the silences of history. As our long journey through whispers of stone, symbols of faith, and shadows of forgotten voyages nears its end, we find ourselves standing not at a final answer, but at the threshold of mystery. For centuries, the story of the Knights Templar has woven itself through both recorded history and half-remembered legend, winding its way across continents and oceans, across the boundary lines of what is known and what is possible. We began with their rise in the medieval world, a brotherhood of warrior monks who swore vows of poverty, yet came to command vast wealth and influence. We watched as they stood guard over pilgrims and sacred relics, as they were praised as protectors of Christendom and feared as secret initiates of forbidden wisdom. And we traced their sudden fall, the arrests, the trials, and the fires that seemed to consume them into ashes. But the ashes, as legend tells, concealed embers that may have glowed across oceans, burned in secret chapels, and smoldered in symbols carved into stone. Over the course of this long exploration, we have walked the forests of Nova Scotia, where buried shafts and inscribed stones point toward treasure, or perhaps toward something more intangible, a knowledge meant to be preserved. We have stood beneath the arches of the Newport Tower, its very structure echoing the geometry and alignments beloved by Templar architects. We have traced runes carved into the Kensington stone, inscriptions that speak of journeys into the heart of North America long before Columbus. We have walked through Rosslyn Chapel, its walls alive with patterns, flora, and symbols that some say could only have been carved by hands aware of lands across the Atlantic. And we have followed the map of Zeno, the traces of Venetian voyages, the whispered guidance of the Venus families whose wealth and esoteric traditions may have carried Templar knowledge into the Age of Discovery. Yet alongside all these echoes, we have also felt the weight of silence, the silence of academia, which often refuses to lend its voice to these possibilities. The official story of history, after all, is built like a fortress. To challenge its walls requires not only evidence, but courage. Scholars who have dared to suggest that the Templars reached America, that the Gospels of early Christianity contained voices silenced by the Church, that the sacred geometry of Old World cathedrals found expression in New World landscapes. Such scholars often risk more than academic criticism. They risk careers, reputations, and sometimes even friendships within their communities. For to question history is not simply to rearrange facts. It is to threaten the authority of those who claim to guard them. And yet, despite this resistance, the questions will not go away. Each artifact, each carving, each star-lined tower, and each coded manuscript whispers to us across time. Taken alone, perhaps each could be dismissed, a coincidence of architecture, a misread inscription, a myth passed down and embroidered by generations. But taken together, they form a chorus too insistent to ignore. It is as if history itself is leaning forward, offering us fragments of a song that was once whole. Consider the run of stone in Minnesota, weathered and contested, yet speaking in the voice of explorers who claim to have reached the heart of a continent. In the 14th century, consider the Newport Tower, standing aloof and stubborn, aligned to celestial patterns, its very mortar whispering of European hands centuries before the colonial settlers. Consider Rosslyn Chapel, where maize and aloe, plants native to the Americas, are carved into stone, built decades before Columbus' voyage. And consider Oak Island, where shafts, tunnels, and booby-trapped passages have consumed lives and fortunes, all in pursuit of something just beyond reach. Each of these mysteries alone might be dismissed. Together, they weave a net that catches even the most skeptical imagination. But what then? Was the Templar treasure? Was it gold, jewels, and relics spirited away from Europe as their order crumbled? Or was it knowledge maps of unknown lands, sacred geometry, fragments of forbidden gospels, wisdom too dangerous to leave in the hands of kings and inquisitors? Perhaps it was both. Wealth would have sustained voyages and settlements, but knowledge, once planted in distant soil, would take root in ways that no confiscation or burning could erase. It is this possibility that the true treasure was not buried in a chest but sewn into the fabric of a new land that haunts us most of all. The final chapters of this story bring us not to a conclusion, but to a reflection. What does it mean if the Templars, or their heirs, reached America before Columbus? What does it mean if the forbidden Gospels preserve truths deliberately excluded from the canon? What does it mean if geometry, astronomy, and sacred architecture were carried across oceans and imprinted on the forests and clearings of a continent that would later become the New World? At one level, it means that history is far richer and more complicated than we were taught. At another, it means that human beings, across centuries, have always sought to preserve what they held sacred, even in the face of persecution. And so we return to the theme that has threaded through this entire journey: persistence. The persistence of symbols carved into stone when voices could no longer speak. The persistence of sacred geometry, encoded in architecture long after its meanings were officially forgotten. The persistence of women's voices, silenced by the councils of the church, yet echoing still in the Gospel of Mary. The persistence of forbidden gospels, hidden in jars in the deserts of Egypt, waiting patiently to be found. And the persistence of legend, carried in the imaginations of countless seekers who refused to accept that history was closed. Perhaps this is the greatest lesson the Templar story has to teach us: that truth, even when suppressed, has a way of surviving. It may be buried, it may be hidden, it may be distorted or condemned, but like seeds lying dormant beneath winter's soil, it waits for the right moment to rise again. And when it does, it changes the landscape forever. As we reach the end of our exploration, let us imagine, one last time, the possibility that Templar ships cross the Atlantic, sails billowing against the winds, guided not by greed but by a mission to preserve something sacred, to carry it where it might endure. Let us imagine them landing on rocky shores, carving symbols into stone, aligning towers with stars, planting seeds of geometry and knowledge into new soil. Let us imagine their heirs, perhaps hiding among early French settlers, perhaps disguised within the folds of Freemasonry, continuing their work quietly, carefully, across the generations. And let us imagine that the treasure they carried was not merely gold, but something that still whispers to us today whenever we encounter these mysteries. The call to look deeper, to awaken, to remember. The Templars' story does not end with their suppression in Europe, nor with their possible voyages across the sea. It does not end with Oak Island or Rosslyn Chapel or the Newport Tower. It does not even end with the rediscovery of forbidden gospels or the rebirth of interest in sacred geometry. For the Templar story, like history itself, is never finished. It continues wherever questions remain unanswered, wherever seekers refuse to accept the simple version of events, wherever mysteries invite us to look again. It continues in you, the listener, as you close your eyes and carry these stories into your own imagination, wondering what lies beyond the veil of the known. And so, as we draw the curtain on this long journey through time, stone, and legend, we are left not with certainty, but with possibility. The Templars may or may not have crossed the Atlantic, Their treasure may or may not lie buried beneath Nova Scotia. The forbidden Gospels may or may not hold truths that could reshape Christianity. But the persistence of these mysteries, their refusal to be silenced, tells us something important, that human beings across ages have always longed for a deeper truth, one that cannot be confined by authority or erased by fire. Perhaps the true treasure, then, is not something buried in the ground or hidden in an archive. Perhaps the true treasure is the very act of seeking, of refusing to accept the surface story, of daring to look into the shadows for the light that still flickers there. The Templars, the Gnostics, the mystics, the explorers, all of them, in their own ways, remind us that history is not only about what was, but about what might yet be rediscovered. And so, with the quiet persistence of these mysteries echoing in our ears, we bring this journey to a close. The story of the Templars in America, whether truth or legend, leaves us with a sense of wonder that perhaps the past is not so far behind us after all. Perhaps it still lives in ruins and carvings, in symbols and texts, in questions whispered through the centuries, and perhaps it lives most of all in us, in our willingness to listen, to imagine, and to remember. As we step away from the shadowed arches of Rosslyn Chapel, the trail of secrets does not end. It stretches across the Atlantic, whispering through forests, rivers, and the rugged coastlines of Nova Scotia. Among the misty islands of Man Bay lies Oak Island, a place whose very soil seems to hum with anticipation, as though the earth itself remembers the footsteps of seekers, adventurers, and perhaps those who sought to hide treasures far older than any crown or scepter. For centuries, Oak Island has been a magnet for mystery, a labyrinth of stone, wood, and water that conceals its truth beneath layers of ingenuity. And intriguingly, scholars, theorists, and amateur historians have long suggested a connection that might bridge Rosslyn Chapel and this remote island. The enigmatic presence of the Knights Templar in North America. Oak Island is not merely an island. It is a palimpsest, a layered narrative written in the soil. The so-called Money Pit, first excavated in the late 18th century, revealed evidence of human engineering that defied simple explanation. Wooden platforms spaced with precise intervals, layers of logs and clay, flood tunnels designed with startling sophistication. Many have asked how a site so remote could bear such craftsmanship. Some investigators have pointed to European techniques, reminiscent of those used by builders of secret vaults, or subterranean sanctuaries, vaults designed to protect artifacts, codices, and sacred knowledge. And while gold and silver coins have been found sporadically, it is the intangible encrypted messages, obscure symbols, and mechanical ingenuity that has drawn comparisons with Rosslyn Chapel. The theories surrounding Oak Island's treasure are many and often contradictory. One line of speculation, deeply tantalizing for those who follow the Templar trail, suggests that the island was chosen as a repository for sacred relics, artifacts that the Templars, fleeing persecution in Europe, wished to safeguard from the eyes of kings and inquisitors. The Sinclair family, prominent patrons of Rosslyn, is often invoked in these discussions. William Sinclair, whose architectural genius shaped Rosslyn's carvings, is rumored to have sailed to Nova Scotia in the 14th century, potentially establishing a hidden network that would connect the Scottish mainland to the New World. Was Oak Island the terminus of such a route? The evidence is circumstantial, yet persistent. Carved symbols in Rosslyn echo the geometrical puzzles found in Oak Island maps, while European masonry techniques appear in the subterranean constructions beneath the island's surface. The very geography of Oak Island adds to the mystery. Its isolated location, protected by treacherous waters and dense forest, suggests deliberate concealment. The tunnels that lead to the Money Pit are sophisticated enough to channel tides, allowing water to flood the chambers. A feature that has thwarted countless treasure hunters. Some theorists argue that this design reflects knowledge of hydrodynamics, far ahead of its time, knowledge that might have been passed down through secret societies or esoteric orders, including the Templars. The meticulous care in constructing such defenses implies that what lies beneath is not mere gold, but something far more precious, an idea that resonates with the sacred symbols of Rosslyn Chapel, where carvings were not merely decorative, but encoded with messages intended for initiates. One cannot discuss Oak Island without mentioning the curious parallels in symbolic language. The so-called coffin stone, engraved with faint markings, has been interpreted by some as a coded map, a set of instructions meant to guide a seeker through layers of deception. In Rosslyn, similar symbols appear in the apprentice pillar, in the delicate tracery that seems almost to hum with a hidden rhythm. Could these echoes across continents point to a shared knowledge? Perhaps the Templars, or their intellectual heirs, sought to create a lineage of secret sites, a series of markers, each containing clues, meant to be deciphered only by those who understood the geometry, the symbolism, and the lore. The notion of sacred geometry as a guiding principle also emerges at Oak Island. The spacing of platforms in the money pit, the angles of tunnels, and the alignment of stone markers suggest an intention beyond mere concealment. This mirrors Rosslyn Chapel, where cubes and stars are arranged with precision, hinting at musical harmonies, cosmic order, and mathematical sophistication. In both places, the human mind appears to reach for something higher, weaving the practical and the mystical into a single design. Could it be that the builders of Oak Island, like the masons of Rosslyn, encoded knowledge about the heavens, sacred proportion, or even the path to hidden relics within stone and soil? Over the decades, explorers, dreamers, and archaeologists have descended into the pit, encountering traps, floods, and complex layers of timber. Each attempt has only deepened the mystery, hinting at a deliberate intention to protect what lies below. Some accounts describe metal fragments, pieces of parchment, and even traces of ancient inscriptions, suggesting that whoever engineered the pit sought permanence, a safeguard against the passage of time. And while no definitive treasure has emerged, the continued fascination with Oak Island mirrors the allure of Rosslyn Chapel. Both are places where knowledge, faith, and legend intertwine, where each stone, carving, or layer of earth seems to whisper its secrets to those willing to listen. Beyond the physical constructions, the human narrative of Oak Island is intertwined with obsession and devotion. Families have spent generations dedicating lives to uncovering what might be buried beneath mud and timber. In this, we see echoes of the Templars themselves, a brotherhood devoted to mission, secrecy, and perseverance. Whether motivated by faith, curiosity, or the promise of riches, the seekers of Oak Island echo the patterns of history, tracing pathways laid centuries earlier by those who understood the value of knowledge and the peril of discovery. Yet the Templar connection remains speculative. Historians caution against definitive statements. The records linking the Sinclairs to Nova Scotia are sparse, often anecdotal, and occasionally contradictory, but the appeal of the theory lies precisely in the interplay between evidence and imagination. Rosslyn Chapel, with its carvings of maize and aloe vera, suggests contact with lands across the Atlantic. Oak Island, with its intricate engineering and cryptic symbols, suggests that the knowledge and perhaps the treasures of the Templars may have crossed the ocean, carried in secret and hidden in plain sight beneath the island's layers. In reflecting on Oak Island, we confront a larger question: what drives humanity to conceal knowledge, and why do we seek it so fervently? The Templars, the Sinclairs, and the countless adventurers who have probed the money pit share a common thread, a recognition that some truths are too fragile, too powerful or too sacred to be left unguarded. Rosslyn Chapel and Oak Island are more than historical curiosities. They are laboratories of memory, repositories of human ingenuity, and mirrors of a desire that stretches across centuries. As the mist lifts from the island's shores, the money pit remains tantalizingly incomplete, a testament to human ambition, secrecy, and hope. Perhaps it is not gold or jewels that lie beneath, but knowledge encoded in earth and timber, waiting for the right mind to interpret it. Just as the carvings of Rosslyn Chapel challenge observers to look beyond surface meaning, so too does Oak Island challenge explorers to read between the lines, to seek the geometry of intention beneath layers of sand, clay, and stone. In connecting Rosslyn Chapel and Oak Island, we begin to see a thread of possibility that the Templars, or those inspired by them, left a network of markers, symbols, and structures meant to preserve not merely treasure, but a philosophy, a sacred understanding, and a map to knowledge hidden from the world. Across oceans, centuries, and layers of human endeavor, the story continues, whispered through stone and soil, calling to those willing to decode its messages. And so, as the sun sets over Nova Scotia and the waves lap quietly against the shore, we realize that Oak Island is not just an island, and Rosslyn Chapel is not just a church. Both are gateways, portals to a deeper history, an invitation to consider that the world, in its vastness, may hold secrets we are only beginning to perceive. And with that thought, the journey continues, drawing us onward into further mysteries that lie just beyond the horizon. As the waves retreat from Oak Island and the dense forests of Nova Scotia whisper their age-old secrets, our journey turns further north, into the frigid landscapes of what is now Minnesota, where a remarkable artifact lies waiting in silence. The Kensington Runestone, discovered in 1898 by a Swedish immigrant farmer named Olof Oman. The stone is covered with runic inscriptions that, if genuine, suggest that European explorers long before Columbus ventured deep into the heart of North America. Its discovery stirred waves of debate that continue to ripple through history and archaeology, raising profound questions about the presence of Templar or Scandinavian knowledge in the New World. The Kensington Runestone is an unassuming slab of gray sandstone, roughly 7 feet long and nearly 2 feet wide. Yet its surface tells a story that defies the conventional timelines of exploration. The runes, etched with care and deliberate intent, describe a journey of 30 men from the west, charting rivers and encountering strange lands. Linguistic experts and historians have long debated its authenticity, some dismissing it as a clever hoax, others insisting that the syntax and runic forms point to genuine 14th century origin. But beyond questions of authorship lies a more tantalizing possibility, that these explorers were guided not merely by navigation, but by a secret knowledge and network of Templar-inspired maps, codes, or esoteric wisdom carried across the Atlantic centuries before the Age of Discovery. What makes the Kensington Runestone particularly compelling to seekers of hidden history is the overlap between its implied voyage and other evidence of early European presence in North America. If the Templars, perhaps through the Sinclairs or their affiliates, had made contact with the continent, could these runes encode knowledge of that same secret path? Proponents of the theory point to similarities in symbolic language, the precise use of geometric markers, the notation of natural features, and even subtle references that echo the sacred geometry found in Rosslyn Chapel. It is as though the stone itself were a waypoint, a fragment of a larger map meant for those initiated into a network of knowledge that spanned oceans. The Runestone's narrative mentions rivers, lakes, and forests that would have been familiar only to those with intimate knowledge of the land. Some researchers have speculated that the explorers behind the stone had not only mapped the geography, but also recorded signs of sacred sites, mineral resources, and locations suitable for concealment of treasures or relics. This aligns with Oak Island's complexity and with Rosslyn Chapel's coded messages, an interconnected system of knowledge, hidden in plain sight, that preserved secrets both material and philosophical. Beyond geography, the cultural implications are striking. The runestone hints at a European presence in North America, centuries before the established narratives of discovery. This suggests that the medieval world was far more interconnected than often acknowledged, with knowledge traveling along clandestine routes, carried by merchants, knights, and scholars who understood the value of secrecy. For Templar theorists, the implication is clear. The order, facing persecution and dissolution in Europe, could have been instrumental in orchestrating voyages that left physical and symbolic traces across the Atlantic. Rosslyn Chapel's carvings of New World flora, Oak Island's subterranean ingenuity, and the ruins of Minnesota together weave a narrative that challenges conventional history, demanding that we consider not only what was discovered, but who carried that knowledge and why. The runestone's story is also a testament to human determination. When Oman uncovered it, he could not have known the storm of skepticism it would provoke. Scholars dissected the inscriptions, comparing rune forms to medieval Scandinavian alphabets, scrutinizing grammar and syntax, and debating the stone's historical plausibility. Some claimed inconsistencies indicated forgery. Others saw subtle linguistic cues consistent with 14th century dialects. What emerges from this debate is more than the question of authenticity. It is an invitation to consider the broader implications. If true, the runestone is not merely a marker of travel, but a signal of intelligence, observation, and the deliberate recording of a hidden history that the mainstream world has largely ignored. Intriguingly, parallels can be drawn between the runestone and Oak Island. Both are enigmas encoded in a medium resistant to casual interpretation. Stone in one case, earth and timber in the other. Both suggest advanced knowledge, whether of engineering, geography, or cryptic communication, and both invite a reconsideration of historical narratives, the story of discovery of the Templars, and of pre-Columbian transatlantic contact. When Rosslyn Chapel's carvings hint at maize and aloe vera, when Oak Island hides chambers and tunnels beneath mud and stone, and when the Kensington runestone marks unexplored northern territories, a pattern begins to emerge. Europe's secret. Voyagers were leaving breadcrumbs, each artifact a key to a larger, hidden map. A map meant to be deciphered by those who could read the symbols of faith, geometry, and exploration. Moreover, the runestone brings a human element to the narrative. The men it commemorates are no longer faceless names in a ledger. They are explorers navigating treacherous terrain, leaving traces of their presence for those who might come after. One can imagine them carrying knowledge of Rosslyn-like symbols, of sacred geometry, of coded instruction and inheritance of the Templar worldview adapted to a new continent. And though the centuries have erased most other evidence, the runestone persists, its silent message daring us to consider the breadth and ambition of these medieval voyagers. It is also worth noting the reception of such artifacts. Mainstream historians often treat the Kensington runestone with skepticism, paralleling the cautions surrounding Oak Island and Rosslyn Chapel. Radical theories that propose Templar or pre-Columbian influence are frequently dismissed as fringe. Yet this resistance underscores the very nature of hidden knowledge. The more disruptive it is to accepted narratives, the more fiercely it is guarded by history itself. For the seeker willing to read beyond conventional interpretations, the runestone is a key, a puzzle, and a whisper from centuries past, inviting us to look for connections across time and space. Finally, The runestone draws us into a broader philosophical reflection. History is not merely a collection of dates and names. It is a web of intention, secrecy, and human curiosity. Oak Island, Rosslyn Chapel, and the Kensington runestone each testify to this principle, reminding us that knowledge, when considered dangerous, precious, or sacred, finds ways to survive across oceans, through stone, timber, and human memory. As we leave Minnesota's cold forests behind and contemplate the paths carved into the continent by these early travelers, the question persists: what was their ultimate purpose? Were they mapping new lands, safeguarding relics, preserving secret wisdom, or leaving a coded invitation for future generations to join them in discovery? The runestone, like Rosslyn and Oak Island, does not answer, it poses questions. Questions that ripple outward, linking Europe and America, the medieval and the modern, the seen and the hidden. It invites us to trace the faint lines of a history that refuses to be simplified, a history where knights, masons, and explorers may have danced along the edges of myth and reality, leaving stones and carvings as their silent testimony. And so, as the Minnesota pines sway in the northern winds and the cold rivers reflect centuries of sky, we stand at the edge of revelation, peering into a narrative that stretches from the Scottish lowlands to the American wilderness and beyond. The Kensington runestone is more than a slab of inscribed rock. It is a portal into a lost northern voyage, a chapter in a story of Templars, secret knowledge, and the human desire to reach across the unknown, leaving hints for those willing to follow. As we trace the footsteps of the Templars across the Atlantic, moving from Rosslyn Chapel through Oak Island and the frozen forests of Minnesota, another chapter of mystery unfolds in the rugged terrain of New England. In Westford, Massachusetts, on a hill overlooking the Merrimack River, lies a curious artifact that has puzzled historians, archaeologists, and local legend for over a century: the Westford Knight. This weathered carving in solid granite depicts, some say, a medieval armored figure, a sentinel frozen in stone. Its origins are unclear, its age debated. Yet for those following the hidden trail of European explorers in North America, it is a marker of profound significance, a symbol connecting human ambition, esoteric knowledge, and the mysterious movement of the Templars across the Atlantic. The Westford Knight is more than an image etched in rock. It is a challenge to our understanding of history. Local lore suggests that the carving predates any known colonial settlement, sparking speculation that it may have been created by European visitors long before the Puritans arrived. Skeptics dismiss it as a modern engraving or a coincidental formation, yet careful examination reveals features consistent with armor and weaponry reminiscent of medieval Europe. Some researchers, tracing the stylistic cues, suggest a link to the armor worn by knights in the 14th century, aligning it in time with the fall of the Knights Templar, and the speculation that remnants of the order sought refuge and knowledge across the ocean. But the Westford Knight is more than a mere stone figure. It is a node in a network of celestial and terrestrial alignments. Local surveys have indicated that the carving may correspond to lines of sight, connecting ancient trees, rock formations, and the nearby rivers. Some theorists propose that the placement of the Westford Knight was not accidental, but intentional, marking a point along a sacred or navigational grid, one that mirrors principles of sacred geometry seen in Rosslyn Chapel. The idea is that explorers, possibly Templar affiliated, employed astronomical observation and geometric calculation to encode paths and markers across the New World, ensuring that their knowledge could be traced, even centuries later, by those initiated into the same symbolic language. Here, the concept of the Venus families emerges, a theory less known, but increasingly compelling among esoteric researchers. The Venus families refer to groups of markers, alignments, and patterns linked to the cycles of Venus as observed in the night sky. In medieval Europe, the Templars, with their deep interest in astronomy and sacred geometry, may have incorporated planetary observation into the design of their temples, tombs, and navigational aids. Rosslyn Chapel itself is thought by some to encode celestial alignments, with carvings reflecting cycles of the planets, stars, and the sun. Similarly, the Westford Night may mark a terrestrial point along a network oriented to celestial phenomena, connecting forests, rivers, and stone, markers in patterns that mimic or respond to the movement of Venus, guiding travelers both physically and symbolically. The interplay between earth and sky, between carved stone and cosmic alignment, is central to understanding the Westford Night and related sites. Scholars of sacred geometry note that in both Europe and North America, medieval architects and explorers often used mathematical ratios, harmonic proportions, and precise alignments to encode knowledge. These systems were not merely aesthetic, they were functional, philosophical, and spiritual. A pillar carved in Rosslyn Chapel could encode a musical interval, a mathematical constant, or a moral principle. A hilltop carving in Massachusetts could mark a point of celestial observation, a river crossing, or a repository of hidden knowledge. Both invite the observer to engage intellectually, spiritually, and imaginatively with the landscape. Further adding to the enigma are the local legends surrounding the Westford Night. Some oral histories speak of strange lights in the sky, of patterns in the stars that seem to guide travelers along rivers and valleys. Others recount mysterious visitors who appeared and disappeared, carrying parchments or tools that hinted at secretive purposes. These stories, while unverifiable, resonate with the Templar narrative, an order dedicated to the guardianship of sacred relics, knowledge, and pathways, blending faith, observation, and secrecy. Oak Island, the Kensington Run of Stone, and now the Westford Night, each reflect this pattern of deliberate concealment intertwined with symbolic clarity, a puzzle awaiting interpretation. It is impossible to ignore the symbolic resonance of the armored figure itself. In European tradition, knights were not merely warriors, they were embodiments of ideals, guardians of knowledge, and initiates into esoteric wisdom. The Westford Night, frozen in granite, may symbolize a sentinel watching over a hidden path, a marker to those who understood the language of geometry, astronomy, and sacred proportion. The very act of carving such a figure into the natural rock could be seen as a ritual and inscription meant to protect, to guide, and to endure through centuries. In this sense, the stone is more than sculpture. It is a document, a message, and a monument all at once. Connections between the Westford Night and Rosslyn Chapel extend beyond symbolism. The Sinclair family, patrons of Rosslyn, are rumored to have voyaged to the New World, possibly establishing nodes of influence and concealment. Some theorists propose that the Westford Night marks a point along this transatlantic network, a waypoint or guidepost linking the old world to hidden knowledge in the new. While concrete evidence remains elusive, the alignment of these sites, combined with astronomical markers and encoded symbols, suggests an intelligence at work, one that transcends simple colonial or exploratory activity. Moreover, the topography of Westford and surrounding areas reinforces the idea of deliberate placement. Elevated hills, river confluences, and natural sightlines provide strategic visibility, allowing the figure to serve as a reference for both navigation and observation. In an era before accurate maps and compasses, such markers would have been invaluable, guiding travelers through dense forests, across rivers, and toward safe harbors or hidden caches. The Westford Knight thus embodies both a practical function and a symbolic resonance, a dual purpose reflected in many Templar constructions. From chapel pillars to subterranean vaults, another layer of intrigue emerges when we consider the cultural and linguistic aspects of the carvings. Some researchers have posited that inscriptions or faint markings around the knight may encode messages in runes, ciphered letters, or symbolic motifs familiar to European initiates. This aligns with patterns observed at Rosslyn Chapel and in the Kensington Runestone, where language and symbol intersect to preserve knowledge across generations. In each case, the medium stone ensures entrance, while the code ensures selective access. Only those versed in the symbolic language, the geometry, or the philosophy could fully interpret the message. The notion of a celestial or planetary connection further deepens the mystery. Venus, with its consistent cycles and prominence in the sky, has long been associated with guidance, balance, and sacred timing. By establishing markers aligned with Venus or other celestial phenomena, explorers and secret societies could encode time, direction, and ritual significance into the landscape itself. The Westford Knight, placed on a hill that may correspond to solar or planetary alignment, becomes not just a monument, but a note in a larger cosmic map, integrating earthly landmarks with heavenly patterns of physical expression of knowledge spanning the terrestrial and celestial realms. In contemplating the Westford Knight, we must also consider human intent. Who carved it? Why here? And why in this form? Was it a solitary sentinel, a member of a secretive order, or part of a broader network extending across the continent? While direct evidence is lacking, the convergence of European design principles, symbolic sophistication, and the known movements of the Sinclairs and Templars suggests deliberate action. The stone is less a relic of casual settlement and more a testament to foresight, strategy, and the preservation of hidden knowledge. Finally, the Westford Knight invites reflection on continuity and memory. Across centuries, through erosion, skepticism, and forgetfulness, the stone persists. It connects us to explorers, knights, and visionaries who understood the value of encoding wisdom in durable forms, who sought to protect what was sacred, and who envisioned a network that transcended borders and generations. From Rosslyn Chapel's intricately carved pillars to Oak Island's subterranean vaults, to the ruins of Minnesota, and now the Sentinel of Massachusetts, a pattern emerges, a hidden history written in stone, soil, and symbol, awaiting those willing to trace its line. The Westford Knight is not merely an artifact. It is a bridge between continents, a monument to ingenuity, faith, and secrecy. It reminds us that history is often written in ways that defy conventional chronologies, that knowledge can be encoded in stone and earth, and that the human desire to preserve, protect, and transmit sacred understanding spans oceans and centuries. As we stand on that hill, imagining the figure gazing across the valleys and rivers, we feel the pulse of a hidden lineage, a Templar echo resonating across the new world, inviting us to look, to decode, and to wonder. Thus, the Westford Knight anchors a northern path in the broader Templar network of North America, a waypoint in a celestial terrestrial map, a sentinel guarding secrets that might connect Rosslyn Chapel, Oak Island, and the Kensington Runestone in ways history has only begun to acknowledge. And with that thought, our journey moves onward, tracing the final threads of a tapestry woven from stone, sky, and human ambition. As our journey through centuries, oceans, and forests comes to its conclusion, we find ourselves standing at the intersection of mystery, history, and imagination. From the shadowed vaults of Rosslyn Chapel, through the labyrinthine tunnels of Oak Island, across the frozen Minnesota wilderness of the Kensington Runestone, and finally atop the windswept hill of the Westford Knight, a pattern emerges, a trail woven by human hands, guided by secrecy, devotion, and a vision that transcends time. These disparate sites separated by geography yet linked by symbol, geometry, and purpose invite us to consider the possibility that the story of the Knights Templar, or their intellectual heirs, is not confined to Europe. Perhaps it is written across continents, inscribed in stone, encoded in symbols, and hidden in landscapes waiting for the right mind to decipher. To comprehend this hidden legacy, we must begin at the beginning, or at least at the known nexus. Rosslyn Chapel. Here, within the intricately carved pillars, the mysterious apprentice stone, and the depictions of flora from a distant land, we see evidence of a mind attuned to both the material and the spiritual. Maize and aloe vera, plants unknown to Europe in the 15th century, suggest knowledge of the Americas long before Columbus. Sacred geometry, musical principles hidden in cubes, and the repeated presence of stars and spirals point to a worldview in which the universe itself is a language waiting to be read. The Sinclairs, as patrons and visionaries, may have encoded guidance for future generations, maps, knowledge, and symbolic keys meant to preserve a legacy that official history sought to suppress. From Rosslyn, the trail appears to leap across the Atlantic, appearing in Oak Island's enigmatic money pit. Here, the soil itself seems to hold memory, layers of timber, clay, and flood tunnels concealing a deliberate intelligence. Whether treasure, relics, or encoded knowledge, the engineering sophistication defies casual explanation. It suggests that whoever built it understood geometry, hydrodynamics, and subterfuge, a combination that resonates with the cryptic genius observed in Rosslyn Chapel's carvings. The island's isolation and carefully constructed defenses imply that this knowledge was too valuable to remain exposed, hinting at a deliberate transatlantic network designed to endure beyond the fall of institutions and the shifting tides of empires moving northward. The Kensington runestone introduces the human element of record-keeping and narrative preservation. The runes etched into its surface describe journeys, observations, and perhaps instructions, encoding knowledge in a language readable only by those familiar with its symbols. Whether forged or genuine, the stone represents an aspiration to communicate across centuries, to safeguard information that could illuminate hidden histories. Its presence in Minnesota suggests that explorers, potentially Templar-inspired, or connected, traversed rivers, forests, and unknown territories, leaving markers not merely for navigation, but for the preservation of esoteric wisdom. Like Rosslyn and Oak Island, the runestone bridges geography and philosophy, making tangible the notion of a secret history embedded in the New World. The Westford Knight brings this narrative into the realm of both the terrestrial and the celestial. Here, atop a New England hill, an armored figure watches silently across valleys and rivers. Its placement hints at deliberate alignment with both landmarks and celestial patterns, echoing the Templars' European practice of encoding astronomical knowledge in stone. The theory of the Venus family is the network of alignments. Responding to the cycles of the planet Venus further strengthens the argument that the Order's influence was both mathematical and mystical. Earth, sky, and human intention intersect here in ways that suggest a sophisticated, holistic worldview, one in which navigation, ritual, and knowledge are inseparable. When we examine these sites together, Rosslyn Chapel, Oak Island, the Kensington runestone, and the Westford Knight map begins to take shape. It is not a conventional map of political boundaries or trade routes. It is a symbolic map, an encoded network of knowledge stretching from Europe to North America, linking sacred geometry, hidden inscriptions, and celestial observation. Each location functions as a node, a marker of human ingenuity and deliberate concealment. The network implies intent, a vision of history in which knowledge, faith, and discovery are safeguarded from the casual observer, accessible only to those who can interpret its signs. Yet the story of this hidden legacy is not purely material. It encompasses philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, and ritual. The Templars, and those inspired by them, were not merely warriors or financiers, they were scholars, architects, and observers of the heavens. Rosslyn's apprentice pillar may encode moral principles or musical ratios. Oak Island's tunnels demonstrate an understanding of mechanics and preservation. The Runestone preserves narratives in code. The Westford Knight may serve as a cosmic reference point. Across these sites, human intellect intersects with sacred knowledge, each layer and inscription a testament to foresight and imagination. The very persistence of these artifacts speaks to a broader human impulse, the desire to communicate across time, to leave guidance and caution for future seekers. There's a spiritual undertone in this work, whether the encoded messages pertain to hidden treasure, philosophical principles, or relics of faith. The effort reflects a recognition of knowledge as sacred and perilous. In this, the Templars' story, if indeed they are at the root of these markers, offers insight not only into medieval Europe but into the enduring human desire to preserve meaning beyond the reach of temporality. Moreover, the hidden legacy of the Templars challenges the assumptions of historians, archaeologists, and scholars. Academic resistance, whether due to lack of documentation, skepticism of pre-Columbian contact theories, or caution against sensational claims, underscores the tension between accepted narratives and evidence that demands imagination. Each of the sites we have explored has been scrutinized, debated, and at times dismissed. Yet the continuity of pattern, the precision of geometry, the recurrence of symbolic language, and the alignment of celestial and terrestrial markers cannot be entirely ignored. They invite inquiry, reflection, and the courage to consider that the story of the Templars and their intellectual descendants may be far more expansive than commonly taught. This journey also illuminates the role of human perception in decoding history. To read Rosslyn Chapel is to move between observation and interpretation, seeing not just the stone, but the intention behind the stone. To explore Oak Island is to confront engineering, intuition, and patience. To study the Runestone is to weigh language, culture, and time. To contemplate the Westford Knight is to integrate geography, astronomy, and symbolism. Across all these sites, the seeker becomes part of the narrative, invited to participate in a dialogue between past and present, stone and observer, secrecy and revelation. And in the end, perhaps the greatest treasure is not gold, relics, or manuscripts, but insight. The Templars, whether directly responsible or merely inspirational, appear to have sought a transmission of knowledge that spans centuries and continents. They remind us that history is not merely a linear story of kings and empires, but a complex lattice of ideas, symbols, and human ingenuity. By following the traces they left from the cryptic carvings of Rosslyn to the hidden vaults of Oak Island, across the frozen wilderness of Minnesota to the Sentinel of Westford, we engage in an act of discovery that is as intellectual as it is historical. In contemplating the hidden legacy mapped across these sites, one is struck by the elegance of the system, the coherence of pattern, and the audacity of intention. Rosslyn Chapel, Oak Island, the Kensington Runestone, and the Westford Knight form a continuum of secrecy and knowledge, suggesting that the Templars, or those inspired by their methods, aspired to leave a trail that would challenge, instruct, and endure. The carvings, tunnels, inscriptions, and stone markers invite us to think beyond conventional boundaries, to trace a hidden network that stretches across continents and centuries. As our narrative comes full circle, we are left with a profound question: what does this hidden legacy truly mean? Is it a record of voyages and treasure, a repository of sacred knowledge, or a philosophical statement encoded in stone, soil, and sky? Perhaps it is all of these and more. Perhaps it is a reminder that human curiosity, ingenuity, and reverence for knowledge can create a tapestry that transcends generations, inviting future seekers to engage in interpretation, reflection, and wonder. And so, as the sun sets over the hills of Scotland, the forests of Nova Scotia, the rivers of Minnesota, and the valleys of Massachusetts, the echoes of the past speak to us across time and distance. The Templars, the Sinclairs, and the countless unknown hands who carved, engineered, and inscribed these markers have left a legacy that is both tantalizing and elusive. It is a legacy that whispers, history is not always what it seems, and the world contains secrets waiting for the mind willing to seek, to question, and to imagine. The stones endure, the tunnels remain, the runes persist, and across it all, the pattern subtle, intricate, and breathtaking beckons the observer to follow, to trace the hidden paths, and to wonder at the audacity of human vision. In this, we find the true story of the Templars in North America, not merely a tale of knights, gold, or conquest, but a narrative of knowledge, secrecy, and human ambition that continues to speak silently across the centuries. And so, with a deep breath and a lingering sense of mystery, we let the story rest. For now, as we leave behind these echoes of stone, legend, and mystery, may the questions linger gently, guiding your own reflections long after the night fades. If these stories stirred your imagination, share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear how you see the Templars' hidden journey. Until next time, may curiosity be your compass, and history your quiet companion.